like my, this is the gavel and the other thing is the thing. I left my thing back at my cottage. It is 8 o'clock, June 17th. Thank you all for being here at 8 o'clock. We're commencing the June meeting of the Northport Village Corporation Board of Overseers. To all the men here, I wish you a happy Father's Day, to those who are fathers, including me. And before we start, I want to just note that, again, I appreciate you all being here at 8 o'clock. There is a lot on the agenda, and without wanting to quash debate, I would love it if we can move along efficiently so that we can enjoy this wonderful day. And that's the point of our being here at 8 o'clock, was to get us out the door early. Amy noted that Lisa is not going to be here, and so Vicki is the only person we're waiting for at the moment.
I believe Vicki is not attending.
You believe Vicki is not attending? I knew she was not yesterday, I did not know about today. Okay, I do have a quorum. I will also note that two things. One is that we have some treats up front. These are little muffins for everyone to enjoy, including the audience. Strawberries.
Fresh picked from Ned.
Fresh picked from Ned. Thank you very much. I'll enjoy those, right? And one other note, if people have a copy or want to see the agenda, there are copies floating around. We've added a new item to the agenda starting with this meeting. It's a test. We'll see if there's value for it or not. We have, starting a year or so ago, put questions and issues from Bayside residents and meeting attendees at the very top of the meeting. We've added an item at the end, after all the committee reports, which is now called comments by meeting attendees on agenda items, because we recognize that it may be that business takes place during the meeting, which meeting attendees may wish to comment on and say, I see that the overseers voted on X and here's my opinion on that, or you might want to think about this for your next meeting. So we wanted to give people an opportunity for that so that it would go into the public record, and we, the overseers, could be thinking about how you respond perhaps. This is a test. We'll see. If nobody wants to use it, we'll drop it off the agenda, but if there's value to it, we'll keep it. That said, typically I ask for an approval of the overseers meeting minutes from the previous meeting, which was on May 13th. I note that these minutes were sent out about half an hour ago. So,
what I can tell you is that there were no edits.
There were no edits.
There were no edits.
On the first draft.
That was sent out.
I recognize that two of our overseers are not here, that nonetheless, a final version went out half an hour ago. And so I will ask for a motion to approve these, but I will completely understand if the overseers feel like they would rather defer. So first I'll ask for a motion to approve the minutes.
Well, I wasn't here, so I didn't have any comments on it. It would have been unfair for me to comment.
That's not a motion to approve. Paul?
So moved.
Seconded?
Motion to approve.
Seconded by Dick. Any discussion on these minutes, including whether we would want to consider them now or defer them until later? Any discussion? Mike says defer to later. You like that? And we have, I will note that there are two overseers who are not here at all, so I don't know what their attitude is on this. I'm going to make the assumption since this went out at 7:30, I've yet to see these final. All those in favor of approving the May 13th minutes? One. All opposed? None. Sorry, opposed 1, 2, 3, abstaining? 1. Motion doesn't pass, so we'll defer these then until our next meeting.
That's
Thank you. Opportunity now for questions or issues from Bayside residents and meeting attendees. Mr. Leitner.
There is a tree that is on private property that has the potential to fall onto several cottages in the immediate area, not the least is my brand new cottage. And I was wondering if there's any, like this is the kind of thing that the safety committee would look at and tell the owner, you know, you may want to look at this. I don't know what the rules are, but, and I'm certainly not trying to be confrontational to, well, actually, I've never been able to get a hold, this is, of this owner who is on, in the lot behind my new place on Oak Street. But I know that it's a worry to at least your cottage as well as mine. And we just didn't, you know, if you don't do anything, it's probably going to fall and damage one of our cottages. And I didn't know if there was something that the overseers could do to say, we're worried about this damaging neighboring cottages.
Judy?
What was your last effort to contact the owner?
It was this, this winter, but it was not about the tree.
Right, and they're current with their taxes, so they do get their mail. My personal view is that if the overseers start to take control over responsibility for managing private property, we'll be here much longer. But in the past, we have said we will write a letter to the private owner and maybe that will get their attention. I would be happy to recommend that a letter go out. We had that experience right next door when it was privately owned and the tree came down right after. We never got actual contact from the people, but they got the letter and then the day the tree came down, so.
Ned, just FYI, this exact thing happened to me in Concord this winter. My neighbor's tree fell on the house. And I said, what about those other trees that they all have that disease, those evergreens that have the bugs eating them? And basically what I was told was what you need to do is get in contact with them and tell them, make sure that they know that there's an issue. Because then it's their responsibility, because actually right now, if that tree falls on your house, that's your responsibility.
Right, but if I've written them personally a letter.
Then that's what helps.
I don't have a problem getting in touch with them, but I just thought it might have more authority if it said that the safety committee has looked at it.
It would be a false authority.
Right.
We've done it before.
So I just have a concern for us doing that because there's so many properties in Bayside that may have that issue.
Yep.
And I don't think that we want to select one specific area, unless it was really a danger to the NVC property or the roads. I could see that might be an area where we get involved in, but otherwise, I think given how large the actual physical land is for the Northport Village Corporation, I just think it would be better if we tried not to get involved.
So basically, they told me the best thing you could do is to have a trained arborist write a letter, and you make sure that they get contact is number one. And then number two, you have to give them, quote, ample time to remove the tree. So you send the letter today and it falls tomorrow, that's still on your insurance.
Right,
But
so
you give
I
them
have to
ample
hire
time,
an
which-
arborist?
What?
No, he was saying that
The best approach is
Oh,
to
yeah.
have an arborist say
Right.
that the tree needs to come down or needs
Right.
to be trimmed, because that gives you the most leverage later.
Right,
When
I
you're talking
understand.
with the insurance, so that's, but
Okay.
it's really something that you should be doing,
Okay,
okay?
I would suggest you make sure your insurance is in good shape.
right.
And if it's overhanging your yard, you can trim it, obviously.
Any other, please,
Speaking of Oak Street, hold on,
could you just stand up? Okay. Only because we have the camera, just want to make sure that people eventually catch this. Thank you.
Okay. I came into the office and asked about doing some beautification at the end of Oak Street, where there's all this Japanese knotweed and rocks. And I was told that I had to come before the overseers to get permission to do that. So here I am. I would like to do some, just some perennials of things that will come back up every year, and I'll keep cutting away at the Japanese knotweed and see if we can. I know you can't get rid of it, but we're going to at least try to keep it like that.
You're gonna lose.
I know. Well, my front yard used to be all Japanese knotweed, so if you keep at it, you can at least put it in.
Any overseer questions? Judy?
mindful that it is ultimately a public way, if
Right.
you, but right now not used as one, that portion.
Right.
My view is, as long as they understand that one day the hard work you're doing might be undermined by a decision of the overseers or the villagers to alter the pattern of use of that public land that's not publicly being used as a road. I wouldn't have any problem with efforts to get rid of Japanese knotweed.
Yeah, exactly. From the infrastructure point of view, we're going to do some work
Okay.
We're gonna do that now for Upper Maple. We're gonna let people know, if you wanna move your plants, you should move them, because we're gonna redo the cage.
Okay.
So just keep that in mind.
Yeah, I fully support any volunteerism for beautification of Bayside.
Thank you.
And am I hearing approval here around the table?
Yeah.
Great.
Okay. Thank you for your initiative.
Beautify away.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other?
Yeah, hi,
Please.
I'm Michael Terrell. I have the house next to the yacht club. I'm on the tree committee, on the safety committee, I'll say that. I'm following up to, I wrote to John and had a conversation with Vicki the other day about the tree between my property and the yacht club. And it's an open question whose property that's on. Last year, the Board of Overseers had, as you recall, some money put aside to deal with some troubled trees. And that tree was put last on the list, rightfully so. It still needs a lot of work. My proposal is that we assume responsibility for that tree, and working with the tree committee and the tree warden, get it back to its natural shape.
Proper shape.
We have a limited budget for pruning, so if you're willing to take it on and you're gonna work with Vicki on it, I'm all for it. I think it's great.
Call it beautification.
It's a beautification, right? You're right, it's right on that line of who owns it. It could be on the yacht club, it could be on the right of way. It's not really clear. It's in the more or less definition of all the deeds.
I would just add, as long as you don't prune it into extinction.
Well, right.
Right. They were.
Have a vested
So
interest
easy.
in that, yeah.
Yeah, it is a nice buffer too, so.
Judy?
I would suggest that although the availability of charitable deductions for typical people are substantially limited under the new corporate tax, that if you want to share the invoice that you have from your arborist, we would give you a tax deduction letter. We're not a 501c3, but we are a quasi-municipal organization, so contributions of that sort are deductible, to the extent they're deductible,
Right.
which is less than.
You sound like a lawyer.
Two notes. One is that I apologize for not responding to your email to me. I intentionally, to some degree, did not, because as president, I don't determine the
I figured.
decision-making of this body. I appreciate the detail in the letter that you sent to me. Two is that my understanding is that there are some sort of wires going into
That's the
and
other
through
concern.
that tree, and then part of the discussion we had last year was concern about pruning and how they would affect those wires, the cabling, and who was responsible for it. As I recall, the yacht club wanted to launch the cable up quite high above the tree and all this sort of
Well,
stuff.
I mean, yeah, sorry to interrupt, but that's the other thing I've mentioned to the yacht club people, and I think I put in my note to you, John, that I'll deal with the power company and coordinate all that. Now, and also work with the tree. I know the service this year is greens, which I can work with them. I have met, because we're having some landscaping done, I have met with somebody who has advised that dwarf cherry tree not be pruned until February. Just to put that on whatever public record, because to do so it would be susceptible to disease. So it may be the case that we do it in February.
Thank
So,
you.
sounds like approval around the board again?
Yes.
Thank you very much.
for your
We
initiative.
appreciate it.
Gosh, if we delay project one, I'll do them themselves.
Right. Any other comments or questions from meeting attendees? We'll move on then. Excuse me, the report of the president. Just a reminder, Amy sent out a couple of weeks ago the schedule for annual reports on part of each of the committee chairs. The committee chairs are responsible for submitting to Amy really soon,
Really soon.
like within a week or so. By the end of the month, things happen very quickly, and as Steve reminded us yesterday, although the annual report happens every year with the same company, nonetheless, we can go through a series of printings and corrections as we did last year. So the sooner you get material into her, the better. The reports of the committee chairs need not be encyclopedic. They can be a couple of paragraphs. It is up to the committee chairs to determine. We would prefer they not be encyclopedic, but to hit the high points of what occurred perhaps during the past year and what you see is coming up in the year ahead. There's also responsibility for a cover photograph for the annual report. If anybody in this room or you know of somebody who has a stunning image of Bayside you'd like to submit, I've done it for the past couple of years, not because they're stunning, but just because nobody else submitted anything, then please do so to Amy, and she'll make a decision about what goes in the cover. And finally, the report needs to have a dedication on the page 1, essentially, across from the inside front cover. And we've had some discussion about that. I don't know if the overseers right now would like to, at least a name or two has been put forth. And I don't know if the overseers would like to consider that now.
I just propose that Amy sends Dan Webster to ask for a picture for the cover, and we'll be done.
And he's got some beauties.
Well, I was also going to say, I don't know if you know Steve Nelson, but he's a professional photographer.
Oh, yeah, we can do
Takes
that
lots
too.
of stuff, so I'll reach
Either
out
one
to
of those,
Steve.
yeah.
A football player.
Not bad.
Judy?
I kind of like the dedication to be a reveal. So I don't know if it's, I doubt very much that it is a proper topic for executive session, but I like it to be a reveal, not a participatory conversation.
I agree.
That's fine. I'm merely noting that it will have to happen, the decision, within the next week or so.
Yeah, so when these nice people get bored with our lengthy meeting, we can have a conversation about it.
Fine. And finally, Amy, what's the date of the August meeting? Does anybody have it near at hand?
Well, it's after the annual
I
meeting.
think it's the 11th.
The 11th?
So which meeting are you?
No, never mind, I apologize, I have it here.
It's the next week.
The 14th.
It's August 16th.
Yeah.
Sorry, August 19th. August 19th. Once again, as was the case last year, the principal of the Drinkwater School, Todd Martin, has offered to have our August meeting down in the Drinkwater School. We had it there last year, and he likes it because not only does it give an opportunity to open up the school to new people, it gives an opportunity to have tours also. And we had some very fascinating tours last year, as I recall, after the meeting of the school. So Principal Martin has offered once again that we have our Sunday, August 19 meeting at the Drinkwater School, and I was curious to know what the overseers think about that. Anyone cares or not, or the public cares or not.
Subject to the discretion of the new board.
Subject to discretion of the new board, but the new board will likely be many of the people who are in this room now.
I think it's fine. I think it's nice.
Different one.
I'll be, anyone else
Flatter.
feel yea or nay? It was nice, I mean, as I recall, we sort of wandered down there. Yes?
John, the only major problem for those sitting there were the aquarium was right behind us.
Oh, the sound.
Yeah, and it made it very, very difficult. And so whether, yeah, so
Nemo was singing away.
you can move it to the stage in the auditorium, but that was very difficult.
Oh, thank you for letting us know. I wasn't aware of sitting up in the front of the room.
Yeah, it was.
Duly noted. All right, I will get back in touch with Principal Martin on that. For the moment, I have a few other things to do there at the end, but that's plenty. Mr. Treasurer, your report, please.
Well, good morning all. I'm going to spend my time this morning just looking at budget issues, with one exception. I don't have financials to go over, and we have more than enough to discuss with regard to budget. But one thing that's popped up is the overseers are aware that our vendors have to either have workers' compensation insurance or a certificate that says we have predetermined that they are an independent contractor. If we don't meet those conditions, we are obligated to pay their workers' compensation premium. So we just received our workers' compensation bill, went up from $3,000 to $5,000, largely because of that provision. There are a bunch of data errors in there. So, for example, Bill was charged entirely to road work, which it has a rate of $7.33 per $100 of wages, when his work is really in a different category at $2. So some of those things will correct. At the end of the year, I think we'll see about a $1,500 negative variance, spending more money than we had planned. This is really not a surprise. Sometimes to get the people we need to do the work we want done, they don't have the workers' compensation insurance because they're a small shop, and they don't want to go to the trouble of getting the predetermination. And the two most notable examples over this past year were the window restoration project and the painting and repair of the community hall. So just one of those things that happens.
So Steve, I just have a question. When we approve the specific organizations to do this type of work, do we know in advance whether they have the workers'
I'm gonna
compensation?
say yes.
We don't have it exactly right in hand.
They tell us,
They
they do.
tell us that.
We
So
always ask, and they
We
always.
know that the big ones we do are parks, work, our trash pickup, all those things, they have those certificates. The people who do our road work and installation of water lines and sewer do.
So just, and maybe I just wasn't paying attention, but when we approve some of these different vendors, if they don't have workers' compensation, it might just be nice in the, when we approve them, to say that they don't have workers' compensation, so that we know that there will be an additional cost associated with it.
And usually it's peanuts.
Right.
You know,
So-
it's $500 at $2 and once $10.
Yeah.
You know, we don't really care. These were a couple of large projects that fell into sort of a, not a loophole, but a decision the overseers made several years ago because we couldn't get the people we needed to do the
Right.
work.
Right. So I think just noting that, especially if we think it's going to be a more significant hit on the budget.
Well, one of the times it's kind of tricky, like the Green Tree, when we had an emergency, Green Tree has insurance, but then they hire people for that day, and then they supposedly have their own insurance, but we have no idea whether they do or not, and they're not being paid by Green Tree. So that's, I don't know how we address something like that.
But we are paying Green Tree.
Right, that should not be an issue,
So
because
they-
we're
It's not
not,
an issue?
it shouldn't,
Them
because we're
is.
paying, yeah, it's an issue
They're
for
subs,
Green.
yeah.
It's an issue for Green's workers' comp rates.
Right, so
Because-
we can't accept that Green says some of them are independent contractors. We have to make sure they understand that everybody you bring that day is covered by your insurance. Because right now, I think that that's what they're trying to do, is we don't pay for these guys, we just pay for these guys.
When they tell us they're covered by insurance,
Yes.
and if they are gonna, from my perspective, push the envelope, we see their certificate. If Green's Tree Service is covered by workers' comp, that means their 1099s and their W-2s are covered by their insurance.
Okay,
If what they're really saying when they answer that question is, oh, I personally, Green,
yes.
have workers' comp insurance, that's a different question, because we're
Okay.
not hiring Green, we're hiring Green's Tree Service.
Okay, great.
So if there's, we have to be careful in the way we ask the question and
Right.
make sure we get the right answer.
That's what all I'm saying, yeah. I don't know how to ask the question right. Maybe somebody else does. Who does?
So there's some copies of the draft budget just adjacent to the muffins, if anybody wants to take a look at it. And the overseers all have the budget worksheet book, which has been updated. In the back of that book is an updated version of the budget, as well as a draft version of the warrants. What I'd like to do is sort of give you a quick overview of this whole process. 2018 and 2019 are very intertwined this year. The voters of the village allowed us to use some carryover funds for infrastructure projects, which gave us a large amount of money to spend on some things that needed to be done within the village. We had to determine which of those were going to be completed in order to budget for next year, because obviously if we do that work in 2018, there's no need to set funds aside in 2019. So what I'd like to do, and this is entirely up to the overseers, the level of detail we go to, but I'd like to give you, first of all, a budget comparison year to year. So this is the 2008 budget compared to the budget that you more or less decided you'd like to talk about today. And what that budget is a 7.3% increase over the prior year. Now, I made one error in there in that I included the Oak Street project that you had asked me to pull out. That's 2.5%, if you want us to pull that back out again, which means it's a 5% increase. But
Yeah,
there's-
we're gonna
there's-
do Oak Street in 2020.
Yeah.
Bills can fix it till then.
Yeah, so I mean, I put that in, that's
Right.
in those numbers you see there, so the
So
numbers
in
come
other
down.
words, it would only be a 5%
Closer to a
increase.
5% increase. And the other piece is that I added in $5,000 for contingency that we didn't talk about, because it doesn't make any sense not to have a little bit of a buffer.
Yeah.
So that number will come down a little bit. So just for the audience in general, I'm actually pretty happy. We have proposed an awful lot of work to be done in this calendar year, which is being done with funds that we already have. So it doesn't require any kind of tax increase. The infrastructure committee has done some, what I think are pretty amazing things in terms of preparing us to get some work done that's been deferred, and to set us up so that once this work is done, our cost of maintaining those areas remains very, very low. So for the overseers, if you want to turn to the budget variance report, page 1, that's an updated version from yesterday. And basically, I guess the main thing you need to know is I put in the things that we know we were going to overspend on, the things we thought we'd underspend on, and come back down to having $35,511 in money to use. So if you turn to the next page, page 2, the top of the sheet says projects from 218 to 19. Second tab. So what you have here are the 2018.
Steve, just a comment, the people in the audience don't have these sheets.
They do
correct?
not.
Okay.
And there is one, that's right.
One here.
These, and if you'd like, you can make a couple more copies.
And with the notes of this meeting, when they're published, we can make this available also as a document.
So what I did is tried to capture everything we talked about yesterday, and the top half of this document does just that. A couple of things of note are that at the end of the day, we had spent more money than we really had set aside. We had already discussed that we're going to do projects on a first-come, first-served basis, and if we exhaust our funds, we won't do one of those projects. But I also built a warrant that allows us to address that, which we'll talk about a little bit later. So, first question is there anything here that is different than what you recall?
No, I'm glad you got the 3,000 in for the additional trees.
Yeah.
And just so people watching on video and people in the audience understand, there was a budget workshop here yesterday at which some of the overseers attended. And he's referred, so some of the overseers have seen an earlier version of this, and now we're seeing a final version.
And so Wendy in particular, the item 9 is to take out that $1,500 for the old hydrant at the top of Rocas Park. So that was, we'll have a vote today during the utilities section to actually authorize that.
Okay.
Well, actually, from my standpoint, I'd like to vote on these now because it makes no sense to continue with the budget unless you approve these.
Okay. I move that the old hydrant at the corner of Griffin and Broadway.
Wait, Steve, how would you like this out?
Do you want to do these one at a time, or do you want to do them en masse?
No, I think we should do them one at a time.
Why don't you start at the top?
Because I only care about the hydrant. Remember, first come, first served is what Mike said yesterday. Yeah, so.
Either way, bottom up.
I'm gonna do the old hydrant, because this is really a rollover from 2017 in any event, or from the beginning of this year. I move that we expend up to $1,500 to remove the hydrant that feeds off of the fire pond. It's located today at the corner of Griffin and Broadway, and we're removing it because of the fear of cross-contamination with the new hydrant.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor? It's unanimous. Keep going. Somebody.
Field Park project? This is one of those beautification type things. We're asking for roughly $1,000 for materials and the installation of a couple of posts and miscellaneous costs. Workers' refreshments.
Because it's being done by volunteerism.
It is being done by volunteers.
I move that the Beals fence removal and renewal projects be approved as set forth in this proposal, the 3-page proposal from Big Rockway.
Second?
Second.
Second by Wendy. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Unanimous. Next.
So the next is the additional tree removal for $3,000. So I make a motion to approve that additional tree removal.
Second? Judy, any discussion? Paul?
It says here $4,500.
We're
You wanna
going
be in
bottom
line
up,
7.
9,
We're on item 7.
7. We're
Additional.
9, 8, 7,
The
7.
additional tree
It's a
removal
countdown.
Okay,
for both.
We're on the $3,000 one first.
okay.
These are the 3 new trees we talked about yesterday that weren't in the original project list.
All right.
Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor? It's unanimous. Next.
So items 5 and 6 have previously been approved by the overseers.
Right.
And are already slated to be completed.
Correct.
So I'll do the next 4, and we'll start at the top.
Go ahead.
The wharf maintenance program, that's our attempt to be proactive with preventing the wharf from degrading from when the bolts sort of loosen up and snap, and we have a lot of movement before we actually get to our annual inspection and repair. Our goal is to replace all the bolts in the wharf over the next like 4 years on a preventative cycle to hopefully keep that wharf in good shape for a long time. So that's what that's for.
Your motion?
That was my motion. The motion is to approve this for that.
Seconded. Judy, any discussion? Paul?
I would like to see that reduced to 2,000.
Any further discussion or comment upon that, or Judy?
My view is that it's an up to motion.
Yes.
We'll only expend what the expert that we hired
Right.
has identified as the preventative maintenance.
Well, yeah, what we're looking at is we're looking at doing a whole, it's sort of 5 sections of the wharf, and we're gonna do like 1 or 2 of them, depending on what the cost
Right.
comes to. So we wouldn't probably spend exactly 4.
Right.
It would be whatever it would cost to do that, and we're not really sure yet exactly what it'll be till we get the quote from them.
But you're not proposing that to be more than 4.
No, well, we can't be, because
Right,
we
that's-
would stop. If we
Right.
could only get through 1 and a little, we would stop at 1 and a little.
So I'm comfortable with the up to 4,
Yeah.
especially with that explanation. And I think that this work has to be done. And so if we spend the money in this year's budget when we have it, then that means that we don't have to spend it next year. So
Right.
again, I think it's a good,
And it's all based upon Pinnacle's report. I mean, if we're not going to give Pinnacle's report deference, then we're
Well,
wasting the money on that.
let's remember, this 4,000 is over and above what's already been budgeted. The 4,000 has been budgeted. This is for preventative maintenance.
Right.
And we expect to have a residual from the budgeted expense. We don't expect to spend that 4,000 entirely. We expect to have maybe 1,000, maybe 1,500 residual. That could be used for the preventative maintenance instead of setting aside another 4,000. I would again recommend 2,000.
Steve?
So I'm not sure what numbers you're looking at versus what numbers I work with. Our total wharf expense is going to be almost $8,000 over budget without this line.
Right.
So there's no residual, there's no additional money available to us. Within that total budget for wharf repair, maintenance, and float in and out is $2,500 for the Pinnacle report, which is usually just, this is broken, fix it this year. This $4,000 is in addition to do the preventative maintenance that Mike just outlined.
And that they
So there are
had
no
started to
residual
recommend
funds.
in last year's report.
Right, it's last year's, it's really part of the rollover money that we're trying to make sure we spend this year,
That's
so that we
correct.
don't have to spend it next year, to keep the budget as low as possible next year.
I know it's a hard pill to swallow, Paul, because we are doing stuff now, we're spending money now, so that our wharf will last for hopefully another generation. So we won't necessarily see the benefit, but the village will.
I appreciate that, Mike, but I think if we scrimp in a couple of places, maybe we won't have to bump the taxes. That's what my concern is.
Can I address that again?
Sure.
This has nothing to do with taxes in this year. This is the current year. These are funds that are available, approved by the voters. So if we don't do this work, we are more likely to need to bump taxes.
Well, what are you saying, we're not gonna up the taxes?
We're talking about 2018 now, is all we're talking about. So this is money we have available. If we do not use this money, it will flow to reserves, is typically what happens with it. And then, I mean, it's available to be used if the voters choose to vote to allow us to use it. But from my standpoint, if there's work we need to do in the village, it is in our best interest to do it as soon as we can afford to do it, because the cost of that work only increases over time.
Judy?
So this has no tax increase impact in 2000.
So if we can roll it over into next year, it does.
I think what he's saying is if it goes into reserves, and then we have that money in reserves that we can apply to this next year, then
Well, we need approval for that.
But still, it's money that we could save for later. So I think it would. Is that what you're saying, Paul?
Yeah.
Okay.
Judy?
The budget that we put together assumes these expenses are incurred this year. If these expenses are not incurred this year on this project list, then we will have to budget for these projects next year, which will make our taxes go up more than the 5 to 7%. This budget we're going to be anticipating in a moment. So it is fiscally prudent to vote to expend the money now because we have it and we don't want to increase the taxes more than we need to. That's the reason we're working so hard on these projects now.
At the same time, you know, we came up with a schedule that we need to go over with Steve on the wharf maintenance. And, you know, we could push it out where we do this preventative thing on a longer life cycle. You know, we're not really sure exactly what it is, but the up to 4 is because if it is recommended that we do a lot of it right now, then we should do it, is the point. So it could be 2. He could say, hey, you know, there's no reason to rush this. Let's just do this section instead of 1 and 2. Let's just do 1.
Right.
But we don't know yet. So
It's an up to 4 number. We're only going to spend what we believe we have to spend
Right.
in the preventative maintenance.
Dick, did you have a comment you wanted to make?
Well, my comment is that scrimping on preventive maintenance is a false economy.
Yes.
It's like stacking basketballs on top of the other. There's something bad going to happen in the near future if we don't get at this. The wharf is, every year it gets a little bit worse.
yes, that's
And the idea of replacing the bolts before they enlarge the holes and all that, so I'm totally in favor of any preventive maintenance issues. There is a problem, and we've transitioned from a reactive to a proactive process. This is what we're looking at. Is that the reactive costs continue for a while. You know, you have the emergency repairs or whatever, you have a height huge risk. As the proactive costs rise, there's a lag before the cost, the reactive costs drop off. So you get a hump in the cost curve. That's where we are now.
Randy?
Just a final comment that we have to remember that the wharf is really the heart of the community. And that this investment in what really brings the value to our community in so many respects, that, you know, real estate values, the part of the community as well. I think it's a worthwhile investment, especially given everything that has been said, that it is being proactive and we might not spend up to the full $4,000. So I'm definitely in support of the $4,000.
Any further commentary? All in favor? 4, all opposed? 1. Mr. Narrow. Keep going.
All right, Upper Maple Street, I make a motion that we approve the $7,500 to redo the roadway, put in some culverts, and redo the ditch on Upper Maple. That is a road where it does run into George Street all winter long. There's oftentimes a sheet of ice there, and the gravel ends up all the way down to the wharf, pretty much. Down Maple Street at times. There's a lot of gravel that has to be replaced every year, so that's going to help save us money in the future when we get over the hump, like you're talking about, for that road. That road hasn't been redone in a while, and it needs to be redone, so that's my motion.
Second.
Second.
Judy, any discussion?
Did you get all that, Amy?
All in favor?
Cameron did.
All in favor? It's unanimous. Next.
West Street and Upper Clinton, I'm going to actually do those two together because I think they belong together because they meet at the top and they join Bluff Road really at the same point. We do want to do those two together, so we want to approve them together. West Street is $11,300 and Upper Clinton is $6,800. The reason West Street is more is because right now it is the low point for all the water. So all the water runs to West Street, runs down West Street, across George Street, and into the houses that are on George Street. They actually have had, on bad storms, have water in their house from rain runoff. So we do have to build that up, and we need to put in a substantial ditch on the side of West Street. We also need to create a ditch on the other side, on the low side, up at the top, because of the way the point comes together. So it is a significant amount of money. Nothing has been done there for years, but it should preserve and protect these roads for a long time.
Second.
Second, Judy. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor? All opposed? Mr. Nair? Is that the list, I believe?
You did it. Came and did it.
I would like to make a comment. I think that Bill and Mike and Dean Brown did a walk around in the village, looking at pretty much all of the roads and a lot of the other infrastructure. And I really want to comment on that
Bill's idea to start off, because these are roads that are not used that often. So the problem is they always fall to the bottom of the list and then they never get done.
Not anybody lives on it.
Right. But we're trying to reduce the annual cost of maintenance over time. Because we're spending a lot of money on gravel. So if we're putting it down, it goes somewhere and then we have to deal with that gravel, so.
Good job.
Thank you, Mike.
Okay, so if we can stay on the page you're on here with projects, but I also want to refer to this part of the budget as well. So we went through, we identified by line how we should budget. The first pass at this budget was a 17% tax increase. So there was a lot of wailing and gnashing that was done to bring it back down to a reasonable level. And with the removal of Oak Street, it's now down to 3% increase.
3?
Yeah.
Oh, great.
Yeah, so that's much, much better.
That's awesome.
Dream big.
There are some sacrifices in there. One of them is that we are not going to budget to contribute to reserves, which is $10,000. If we budgeted to contribute to reserves, we would need to tax to get that money. And we have also stopped the contribution to the sewer, which has been in place for many, 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 many years, of $5,000, because the tax burden that would have occurred as a result of that decision was viewed as being too onerous for the property owners here in Bayside. So within that, we now come back to here. So having pulled those things out to get some of the expense out of the budget, we have a series of other things that are in the budget, and I just want to confirm with the overseers, this does not require a motion because the total budget will address that. That we're going to take a second pass at wharf preventative maintenance. In safety, we anticipate adding 2 hydrants, and we'll have hydrant rental of about $900 per hydrant. The people working on trees had asked for $9,000 for replacement and $4,000 for ongoing just pruning, maintenance, taking care of our forest, and that was reduced somewhat just based upon the sheer amount of money needed in the budget. So we'll replace 3 trees and defer the other 3 to the following year. At the bottom of North Street, the bank there is failing, and
On the trees?
Yep.
We know of 6 right now, and then
Yep.
there's 3 more that are going to come down, so it's 9 trees. We're only really providing money for 3.
1/3.
Yeah, 1/3. So.
yeah, I'm just referring to your original proposal.
Oh, yes,
Right.
yes, okay.
Right.
Right, good.
The North Street Bank is failing, so there's a proposal that we go out and do the engineering. We need to figure out how to fix that so it doesn't slide into Penobscot Bay.
Right, I'd like to say something about that.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, the reason we want to do that now is because we're hoping to piggyback that on some of the seawall design work, permitting work. So hopefully we can get a better cost by permitting both at the same time.
And then the last piece is we've been working on community hall electrical because it needs to be done, number 1, and to accommodate Bayside Arts and some of the programs they'd like to hold, number 2. We have $8,000 that's already been set aside by the overseers for use this year, and feel we need another $4,000 to get the job done. So that was put into the budget for next year. And that's what that really boils down to. So
that everybody understands, especially those watching, we had been earlier voting on 2018 items. Steve is now referring to items that have been put into the budget for 2019, next year. That's what we're discussing now.
And there are a lot of things we're checking off with that budget here. I mean, we are rewiring the whole upstairs because it's the history of wiring. The building was built before wiring, so it has the original type of wires and some of today's. Unfortunately, not many of today's wires. So we need to take it all out and put it in. We're going to up the service to 200 amps because we are right on the edge of 100 amps when we have things now where it's really hard to find a plug. Once it's going to be easier to find a plug, we're going to go over 100 amps, especially during some of the events that we have here. So 200 amps is really, it's as much for safety as it is to allow that extra power because you just need it. I mean, you build a house today and it has 200 amps. So our community hall for Bayside Arts should have 200. And then we're also going to wire potentially for a future ventilation fan up there, but we're not doing that now because we don't have any funding for that, right? And then we're also going to put in a toggle switch, an arrangement over in the kitchen, because the deal is that when we have pancake breakfast day, we need a lot of power in the kitchen. when we're not gonna have pancake breakfast day, and we have the other part of the building being used, that power can be used. So it'll be a higher voltage that can be used for the Bayside Arts or pancakes. So I'd just like to say, right now, Ned, there's no way you can have a pancake play, okay?
So assuming that's consistent, all of that is reflected in this draft budget. So assuming there's no discussion about that, I'd like a motion for the overseers to approve this draft budget for inclusion in the annual meeting.
With the further adjustment of taking Oak Street out.
Yes.
Yeah.
So is there a motion for
I
that?
would move that the 2019 budget presented by the treasurer with the exclusion of Oak Street be presented to the voters at the annual meeting this year.
Is there a second?
A second?
Wendy, any discussion? Paul?
Since Mike just indicated that we're going to try to include the North Street bank design in with the storm wall, why is this on next year's budget? Shouldn't we defer that to 2020?
This is just the design piece of it, which is not the build piece of it.
Right.
Well, this brings up a point, because we are gonna take the design money for the seawall out of reserves, so this could be included in with that. Is that what you're getting at?
Yeah.
That is a possibility.
That is not my recommendation.
Okay.
But when we get into warrants, that will start to answer some of those questions. So you want to defer this till we do warrants, that's fine.
Yeah, let's do that, because I think that that's a valid point. We should think about that.
Steve, you go ahead.
So, you have the proposed warrants. Now, most of these are really boilerplate. They're the sort of thing we do every year. The things in red are going to change, and they're going to change. They aren't here now because I needed you to approve a budget before it makes sense to put what the budget is in here, and I need to review indebtedness of the village. But these are very, very straightforward. Article 1 is choosing a moderator. The president's report is Article 2. The treasurer's report is Article 3. Article 4 is the overall budget, which we just finished discussing, and before we finish this meeting, you will either approve or change. Article number 5 is a
Tax anticipation note.
yeah, tax anticipation note in the event that we needed our tax money and we're not able to get it otherwise.
You need to change the number in the middle that's not red, where you have 202, to match that to whatever the budget amount number would be.
Absolutely.
And when we discussed this yesterday, you were concerned as to whether it does allow essentially the anticipation of the funds. Now that you've read it, are you comfortable that this is a true tax anticipation note?
Well, I don't know how you define true tax anticipation note, and I'm not sure I would either, but the answer is no. But that's a point for another day. Article 6 authorizes the overseers either to borrow or use reserves in amount not to exceed $250,000 in the event of a catastrophic event within the village before the next annual meeting. I would like the overseers to consider increasing that amount, because I don't think $250,000 for something that is really significant will be enough.
That was what I was going to ask as well. Have we increased that number at all?
We went from 100 to 200 to 250. And to me, it should be, $500,000. There's no point in having it less than we need, knowing that we only call upon it in the event of a catastrophe.
And it's been in there as long as I've been involved with the overseers, and that's about 10 years now, so we've never used it.
Right.
So, can I ask a question, Ms. Sutton? So if we don't approve this, is there a way to use the 250 till we could approve more? We'd have to wait till.
Well, if we stayed at 250
Right.
and the wharf washes away,
Yes.
we'd have 250 to spend.
We would not be able to get
Until the next annual meeting.
Until the next, you couldn't have a special meeting or?
The voters
There,
said,
you can have a special meeting under the charter, but is limited to July and August.
Oh, it
So
is?
doesn't really do
Okay.
you any good.
That was my
Special
question.
meeting.
Okay, then we need to do it.
Yeah.
I thought if we could have a
Right.
meeting in February because the wharf washed away, then we
Right.
would do it. but-
No, not that. The
Okay.
annual meeting that does provide for special meetings, but only in a very limited time frame.
Okay. So that
Bear in
people could be
mind
present.
that in that catastrophic event, one of the big numbers we have here is our insurance. Bear in mind, we do have insurance for our wharf, so,
Right.
but no, there's no harm in putting it up to 500, there's no downside.
So that would require a motion, or are we gonna approve the
We're gonna
warrants
put
on
the whole
mass?
warrant on mass, I think, so.
So I think we changed that to
Five.
500.
Now, that Article 6 reads only for the community hall and the warrant?
No, unless you, it also says shoreline damage, repairs of
Property
roads.
owned by Northport.
Yeah, property owned by utilities. In the old days, it was only the wharf. Then we added the community hall, and then we've tried to grab it so that it's essentially anything we own.
So if we're good with that, so Article number 7, I have a notation there to delete or revise. This was the original warrant that allowed us to use the infrastructure funds we're using for all those projects we're tackling in 2018. What I have recommended is that we revise that as opposed to deleting it. So we have a number of projects that are in process. We may not be able to complete them all this year for any of a number of reasons, and the overseers have talked in terms of rolling them into next year. Well, rolling them into next year without financial support doesn't happen.
Right.
So what this does is essentially says, we think we're gonna get all those 2018 projects done by December 31st, but we may not. We may not either because of contractor availability, or we may not because of lack of funds. Because we've said we've got a lot of things we could do. These are no higher than sort of estimates, and we may come in less than that, but what happens if we go over? So I'm proposing that we have a warrant to ask the voters to let us use up to $10,000 in reserves to complete that list of 2018 projects.
Yeah, I like the revision. It helps the voters see that we're not using it as a wish list or, pie in the sky. It's exactly what we promised we'd already do. It's got a cap on it. I think it's wise.
And that way, some of these things we talked about, like road projects, they'll be the last thing we're probably working on, and what if we run out of money? Well, we'll be able to fund it.
So it's 10,000 isn't enough.
Well, so we're assuming that the money that we talked about on that, I think it's page 2,
Right.
right?
Yeah,
Where we have $35,500 in reserves.
Right.
Or not in reserves, in infrastructure funds dedicated to those projects. We think we're gonna spend $35,100, so we're right on the line.
Right.
So any of a number of things could go sideways. We could have additional expenses elsewhere in the village. It could go to our benefit. We might find out these projects cost less money. So this $10,000, if you wanna think about it, supplements that $35,000.
Okay.
So it gives you more money if you need to. It isn't enough to redo all these, but if we do what we should do, they're all gonna be done anyway.
Yeah, right. I'm just worried that if for some reason Dean can't get West Street and Upper Clinton done, it's way more than the $10,000
That is correct.
So, but my opinion is it should be the highest of, it should be up to whatever one of these projects is.
Well, that's why you have discussion.
Yeah, that's what I'm discussing. So, but I don't want to earmark more money. I just want to make sure we can cover that.
So what would happen is, I'm just gonna use really round numbers that don't necessarily tie together.
Right.
You have a project for $20,000 you can't get done.
Right.
That money is gonna go to reserves.
Right.
So it sounds to me.
So we would have the money. There's no additional cost to the village.
And can we appropriate money out of reserves at a regular
Not
meeting?
without something like this.
No, it has to
That's
be
why
an
we do
article.
this. That's why.
Yeah.
So it sounds to me as though the projects that are most likely to go sideways are the road construction projects.
We're relying on Dean's schedule
Right.
and weather in the fall. And if it's
So-
bad,
And money we
Yeah.
spent
Right.
for that.
So what if we,
and money we spend before
I remember the last clause that you both said, or money we what?
Or money we spent on other projects.
Right.
that. Right.
So could we change I like the language that you put here in the revision, but could the number, the 10,000 number be put in at the, 17.1 or
18.1.
18.1, which is the two roads?
Yeah, that would be the maximum, so we didn't do
Yeah.
those two.
I would feel comfortable
Because
with
that project requires us finding a home for some of the fill, right, though? We gotta find a home for some of that fill, so.
Yeah, I like knowing that the roads are gonna be the ones that we have the least control over.
Right, okay.
18-1.
So 18-1?
What do you think, Wendy?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, there's no, oh, sorry.
It doesn't limit the use of these reserves to those 2 roads.
Right.
It says it's the projects we've identified, so those 9 projects.
And don't get me wrong, Bill and I are gonna try to get Dean out here in the next week or two to
Right.
get it locked down for the fall.
Right,
But
understood,
you just don't know.
right.
So this may require some explication at the annual meeting as to why the specific number 18-1 is being chosen as a sort of insurance policy over and above what's indicated there.
And
Okay.
because the variables of schedules.
Exactly.
So are you comfortable with asking?
Yeah, it works fine. Yeah. So I have another one, and what I will do is insert a list of projects in that warrant, so people can see exactly what we're talking about.
These.
This money would be useful, yeah, exactly. So I put in a new article, letter A, to see if the village corporation will vote to authorize a majority of overseers of the corporation to withdraw from reserves to fund consulting and engineering studies for the repair of the seawall. Withdrawal from reserves not to exceed $10,000, or some number. I don't know what number it's gonna be. So Paul, to your point, this is where the funding will come from for the seawall work that needs to be done in 2019. So the North Street piece is tax, the seawall piece is coming from reserves, whatever that number is that the infrastructure committee tells us they need. It would all be done at the same time, it's just funded from 2 different sources.
Same company, though, we're just
Yeah,
doing
same company, we're just paying for it out of 2 different checkbooks.
If we took the $10,000 for the North Street bank design, what would that do to the tax?
Out of, in terms, take it out of reserves as
Yeah.
well.
Does that give
Then
us
we wouldn't
under?
have a tax rate if we increase it all. It would be 10,000.
It would bring it down pretty low.
Well, I mean, can it be 0? If it can be 0, we should consider it.
Well, you could conceivably make it 0. I will tell you that I don't advocate absolutely no tax increase for a host of reasons. We have close to 10 years of no tax increase. And there isn't a person here who lives somewhere that can say they've done that anywhere else they live. The money is being very, very well spent by the overseers. The kind of infrastructure improvements we made are critical to the village. And this is a really, I think, minor increase to maintain the quality of the assets of the village. So to draw from reserves means we start to deplete what is intended to be our rainy day fund.
Yes.
And we've also had discussions about using those same reserves to fund seawall, so we don't have to have a tax increase there. So I am concerned we can't spend that money more than once.
Yeah,
And
that's true.
as we start pulling and saying, well, why don't we just use a little bit? So right now, if you want to think about it, I don't know what that number for Article 7 is going to be. We may not use any of it, we may use 18,000. I don't yet know what the number infrastructure committee is going to give me for this warrant.
But Article 7 should be a net 0, if you think about it. We don't spend it now, it rolls into reserves, and then we spend it in reserves. It ends up being a wash to the reserve.
Unless the costs of the projects exceed what we have,
Okay.
which we don't know.
Well, all right, okay.
1 second,
And
Wendy?
then the other
I'm
piece
sorry,
is,
Wendy,
It's okay.
this ties to your whole budget. So let's say we have a really horrendous winter, and we spend another couple $1,000s on winter roads. That's money we don't have to use on projects, so.
Wendy?
So, just a comment, I actually have been on a governmental board that had their priorities being to not raise taxes. And in fact, I'm not on the board right now, but this year they could not raise taxes enough to cover their budget. So it was short-sighted in their respect. And so I agree, I think that we should, you know, we've kept the taxes low, you know, without raising them for 10 years now. I think that we have these expenses that are coming up. I think investing in our community is important. And so I agree with what you've laid out, Steve, in terms of the use of the funds.
Judy?
And just to pile on or amplify that comment, one of the comments raised at the very beginning was, for the first time since we created the wastewater treatment plant, the village will not be contributing to the sense of the cleanness of the bay derived from that. I agreed yesterday that I could support taking that $5,000 out of the budget because we were translating those general beneficial dollars into other general benefits. If we were now going to say, let's take the 10 out of reserves, I would be sitting here saying, let's put the 5 back in. So it would be a false economy.
You know, it's an interesting debate, and there's just one other piece, and Wendy, you weren't here yesterday, so there's a tab listed as a debit reserves. It's really debt and reserves. So for purposes of our audience, we have 2 outstanding bonds, we actually have 3 outstanding bonds. 2 of them will be paid off. One of them that we pay $35,000 a year will be retired in 6 years. The second one that we pay $22,000 a year will be retired in 7 years. So there's a longer term strategy to use reserves to fund whatever we do for seawall repair. And depending upon what the expense of that project is, it could be used to mitigate taxes going forward. But that's still future, still things we don't see. So for this particular year, to increase taxes, see what happens next year. Maybe they come down, maybe they stay the same. I don't have a crystal ball that will answer that question.
They rarely come down though. That's the bugaboo.
I think that Steve's analysis here with this new Article A has struck the appropriate balance. Some of this being funded by tax revenue, some of it being funded by reserves. And I think that's a nice balance that we can advocate for at the end of the meeting.
So the missing piece here, and I guess I would ask the overseers to allow the infrastructure committee to provide me with some number. Now, for purposes of this meeting, we can say no higher than, what's your highest estimate for that seawall design expense? So no higher than 25K, and Mike can come back and say, I talked to the guys, I've got somebody who's gonna do it for 20. We'll reduce the number to 20. As long as we can get that information by July 1st.
Since Wendy has some personal knowledge as to seawall designs.
Oh, is that not your design?
It's less, but, I mean, it's, yeah.
Well,
It's
again, we did an RFQ so that we can select the design firm. So in theory, they're already up to speed. They should be at 20 or 30% by the time we have the presentation and get the report. So we shouldn't have to pay for it twice.
No.
25K.
Yeah, that's my guess.
Lee would have us doing it 2,500, I believe.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, so 25K is in there, and the last 4 articles, 8, 9, 10, and 11 are all correctly.
Well, except we need to address 9, 10, 11 because of the bylaws change. This is,
Okay.
since we're going through, we might as well talk about it now.
Yes.
Yeah.
Switch over this to the governance side of this.
But before we go, one of the outcomes of the motion to approve these, I think, is going to be a qualifier that says you let Judy and I get the final details into place, because we cannot present you with a complete document today.
Yeah, because we need to get the treasurer's statements, we need to make sure we're comfortable with the bonding.
And we're sort of trustworthy.
Sort of.
Wait, you can't say that yourself. There's no credence.
That's true.
So let's move over to the governance side.
So, you will all recall that we had, I think, a substantial change in the bylaws last year, wherein the villagers approved transitioning every elected official from a 1-year term to staggered 3-year terms. We need to transition into that for this year. Everyone who was elected last year was elected for 1 year. We now will be standing, whoever stands for overseers and for officers will be standing for a 3-year term. We don't want to have, we want to have that as a staggered event. So Tim, with the governance committee, met yesterday. Tim, who I lean on heavily for this stuff, has suggested that the articles, that we need to have 6 different articles to help this transition. They all have to be by written ballot because the laws require that, which is what the draft says here. As you may recall from the annual meeting, that's often a default. The nominating committee will make a nomination. Someone from the floor may or may not be nominated. If there is no one nominated from the floor, the nominating committee does the written ballot. So we want to have it say to elect by written ballot a president for the NBC for a term of 3 years, for the treasurer for a term of 2 years, the clerk for a term of 1 year. That allows the staggering. Then we need to have a ballot for 3 of the overseers for 3-year terms, 2 of the overseers for 2-year terms, and 2 of the overseers for 1-year terms. That'll allow us to get that staging. As we go through this in over 2 years, we then will ultimately retreat back to only having about 3
3 copies. Yeah.
ballots.
That makes sense.
So, but this year, we need to do that staging. I can get that language to Steve and plug in, if you all approve of that language.
Is that going to be an elected term? We all choose how long a duration we want to be on the
Very
panel?
good question.
Well, the nominating committee will actually ask, I guess, each of the overseers,
Where do you want your name?
which of those 3 flavors do you want to sit in, at least for this, and then once you get in, you become part of that 3-year cycle. So
What if there's a conflict? Too many 3-year terms and not enough?
that is
2
for
or
the
less?
nominating committee to resolve with the overseers they're talking to.
And with the candidates. The overseers say, that's great, so glad you want to serve for 3 years. We got 7 people still ready to serve for 3 years. Can we put your name down for 2? Apropos of that, Blair has volunteered to serve as the nominating committee again, if the
Correct.
president wants to appoint him. Heidi has helped him in the past. She indicated that Heidi von Bergen, that last year, as I understand it, that she wasn't interested in helping this year. My personal view is Blair's done a great job. I would encourage Blair to get some help. So that you can have diversity of choice to lighten your load. So I would ask that Blair go out and get someone to help him, if you're going to appoint him as the nominee.
I will. Are there any other overseers who have any comments or notes on this regarding the nominating of the nominating committee?
The nominating of the nominating.
If not, then Blair, if you're willing, I'll appoint you as the nominating committee for this year's annual meeting, and as Judy indicated, per your interest and availability, to find someone to assist you. So that's the bottom end. Does everybody understand that essentially to get to a staggered term, for the first year, we're going to have 1, 2, and 3-year terms for both the officers and the overseers, and then starting next year, people will start hitting in on those 3 years, and then by year 3, we won't need any more 1 or 2-year terms. Everybody will be in a 3-year cycle.
Unless to fill a vacancy.
Right.
Unless they fill a vacancy, exactly. Is there a question from the audience? Mr. Samway?
Just the one, just for the overseers. Let's say in the first year, there is going to be an election for 3 overseers for a 3-year term, and there are 5 nominations, okay? The 2 people that are not elected, they can still be eligible from the floor or on their own to be renominated for a 2-year term or for a 1-year term, so that nominations from the floor don't require a second. You can nominate yourself, so that for all offices and all the overseers.
So that's the order, you start with 3-year term.
The overseers can change that.
Okay.
Okay, you can't change the term, but if you decide, no, wait a minute, I want 2 overseers for 3-year terms. So that list, you can change that. That was a suggested way of opening it up. I mean, you've got 7 and trying to figure it out, so that.
Yeah, the governance committee thought it was a good idea yesterday.
Yeah.
3, 2, and 2.
So there'll be a series of votes at the annual meeting. First, a vote for after the officers. First, for
Yes.
3-year overseers. If there are multiple people there, they can then essentially be renominated when the vote comes to the 2-year, or renominated when it comes to the 1-year.
Correct.
So you actually
They're
count
automatically nominated?
No, they can
No,
choose
no.
to. It's their
Okay,
choice.
you
It's a
can
separate
choose.
article, okay.
You can choose.
So you're actually, this is going to make the meeting fun, because you're going to have to actually pause and count the 3 before you do the other.
Correct.
You have more than 3 now.
If there are more than 3 nominees.
We'll get
And
the
then if there are more than
best
2, and then
You'll
there's
still
more
be in
than
first
1.
place.
Yeah.
We set on the various warrants
More or less. So,
with the understanding that,
Well, we need a motion.
right, but that with the understanding the 2 of you would work out the exact numbers that are in here.
yeah, there's one last piece, which I don't see on the agenda, but would be included as a warrant, is we have an opportunity to replace the police cruiser. We have reserve funds that would allow us to do so.
Yeah, good point.
We'd upgrade by 10 years, 10 more years for a fully equipped cruiser. So I don't know, that would have to go into these warrants. I don't know if you want to approve these, come back and revisit that after you talk about that. If we want to change gears and talk about cruisers.
So I have I think the safety committee doesn't have an opinion on replacing the cruiser unless it needs to be replaced. I mean, that's not something that we have specific knowledge on. So I think if there's, for the people who use a cruiser, if there's advice that it's long in the tooth and there's an opportunity to replace it, then I think we should consider that.
Can we have Bill come down with the meeting?
Yeah.
What do you think of the current cruiser?
Right at this point, we're all up to date, it's in pretty good shape. I kind of look at it as you're upgrading from you're upgrading, what is it, 10 years, isn't it? I think it's 10 years, you're going from 10 years back to 10, you know, so you're getting a newer cruiser. The other thing that you're getting with the newer cruiser is you're getting a newer radar detector, and you're also getting a cruiser camera, which, in my opinion only, for our one officer, he needs to have a camera to help him out in the field.
Because he's always by himself.
Right. And there's some other things coming with that cruiser. I mean, it's just gonna be taken off the line, and we're gonna have it, they're not gonna take anything off it, like we did with the other one. The other one, they had it almost always stripped. So we're getting newer equipment too with it. That's,
We don't use it that much.
we don't use it that much.
Well, I think it's important to know if we're gonna have a cop this summer.
Well, yeah, and so we'll talk about that in the safety committee.
So do we want to resolve this cruiser issue now, or do you want to return to it afterwards?
I'd like to say further that Bill and I have talked about deploying the vehicle without a cop this summer.
That's a secondary matter.
That's it,
Do we,
yeah,
right
so
now,
okay.
or we're talking about buying the new cruiser, do we want to resolve this as part of the warrants, or come back to it?
Well, I think that if we have a general sense that when we get to the safety committee report, we will flesh this out more, that we can incorporate that into the warrant. I think we're ready to approve the warrant with the possibility of adding a warrant item for the vehicle. I would move that the warrant that we've just reviewed be approved with the modifications that Steve has indicated in terms of the numbers, and the governance committee with the caveat that Steve and I make sure that we've got it right.
So how much is the new cruiser?
So it will be, it's $1,500 and their donation's already on the table, so it will probably be, $1,000 or less, so.
And we have the money in reserves.
Right, so I think that we could talk about this separate from the warrant.
Okay. Do I hear a second on Judy's motion regarding the
Can
totality?
we
of
clarify
warrants?
that again? Clarify that again.
Yeah.
There's a motion to approve the warrant as drafted with the amendments that we've all discussed, including the inclusions of the governance committee, the recommendations for staggering the votes for the officers, subject to approval of the final draft by Judy and Steve.
Okay.
Is there a second for that? Wendy seconded. Any further discussion on the approval of the warrants? Hearing none. All in favor? Mike?
Yes.
That's unanimous, and I want to make sure that when Amy gets back, that she records that in the notes. I think it's worth recording.
Yeah. Now, for timing, guys, what Steve and I would be doing is finishing this up. You all have to sign the warrant so they can get posted and published. We have time to do that, so but do be mindful that when we tell you it's ready for you to come into the office and sign, you have to come into the office and sign it.
And the deadline is really July 1st. If Amy has everything by July 1st, she can get the book done.
Right.
We have to sign that before the first.
And my last piece,
Steve?
I need a motion to approve the draft budget.
I move that the draft budget with the exclusion of Oak Street be approved for presentation to the village.
Wendy, second. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? So, one moment, please.
Thank you all.
I just want to say that Steve did an amazing job. When we were looking at these numbers, including a very aggressive wish list, our hearts were pounding a little bit in terms of 14, 15% increases. I think even 17 was what we were starting with yesterday.
Okay.
And we really crunched, and I think that this is a very palatable budget. I appreciate your support.
No, I have seen.
Absolutely.
Indeed.
Mr. Page, that leads us to you in your report. Village agent.
The,
Oh, that's
Thank you.
I started to put that green fence around the basketball court that you guys wanted me to do. I haven't finished it. And while I'm doing it, I'm getting all kinds of flack from people, but, so there may be some issues there. So I just want to say that is not finished yet.
Got it.
On my end. What was the other thing about? As we've already discussed, I got the engineer in to inspect the dock. He's got his report back, and now we gotta sit down and crunch some numbers and come up with that. So that's ongoing. Done a lot of work with Mike on a lot of this budget stuff for the roads and different things that have to be done. There's a lot on the infrastructure committee's plate, so there's a lot of stuff going on. And I'm surprised how well it's starting to come together, just because there's so much stuff going on. So that's one thing. So I want to thank him for a lot of his get up and go and get us going in one direction or the other. We've had a kind of a stall on some things, but that's really good. I think we're in pretty good shape on that. The only thing that I do have here, and that's because that will come up through the utilities. I think that's it.
I had indicated on the agenda, Bill, because you mentioned the village banking at the end of North Street
Yes.
as a project. I think we should at least explain what we're talking about with that, because not everyone's familiar with that.
Oh, a lot of years ago, the banking all along the end of Clinton Street and the house that was there that used to be owned by the Fullers, and our part of the property on the other side of the house all slid to the ocean. It was a mad dash to save the banking, so the village on their assets on both sides of the Fuller's house to try to stabilize that and fix that back then. That's been quite a long time. One side seems to be doing very good, with a few little issues. The North Street side is finally back to a spot where we really need to address it. Sometimes when I drive through there during a winter snowstorm and it's hard to see and that, it comes into my mind, you know, we're sitting on what they call green clay. That moisture gets on there, freezes a little bit. That old banking could go, and I envisioned myself being on the beach before I go. But I envisioned that portion of that road disappeared there. And it also may, when that happens, it also may, we may lose one house or we may lose two houses if that happens. So I believe we really need to think about addressing it and getting it back up or do something with it to stabilize it. It's an ongoing issue there. I know I've brought it up several times over the years, and we just, like a lot of things, we didn't have the money, so we put it off. I think we're at that point now that we don't, because this year, with the water that we had, and we had a water leak in that area, which didn't contribute, you know, help it much. We lost some more this year, so it needs to be taken care of.
Mike, what's the plan on this? Or is there a plan?
Well, the plan is that it is a discharge point, so it's going to require some permitting. So the plan is to start the permitting in 2019, along with the seawall permitting. And then we'll have to see what the result is of what we're going to do for costs and so on. But if you go look at it, there's 6 foot of pipe exposed. And if we lose the end of that road, we lose the ability to circle around through there, which will be a huge problem, especially in the winter. That road will become unplowable because you can't go backwards on that road.
Right.
There's no way. So.
Bill?
And one other thing to add to that is we have a main sewer line that's right there that takes care of all this north end of the village right there. That's pretty close in that area. And we also have a main water line right there in that area too, so we would lose infrastructure.
Right. So the intent, as I recall, is that this permitting cost, we could at least look to see if the seawall permitting could somehow absorb some of this.
Yeah, well, I'm hoping that it's just, we're working on the area anyway, and it's all can be permitted at once.
Great.
And Judy did bring up a good point yesterday at the workshop, which is if, because this is a discharge point, the permitting cycle is a little longer, we don't want to hold up the seawall with this. We would split them off, which might cost us a little bit more, but we don't want this driving the bus at the timeline for the seawall.
Understood. Anything else? Bob?
You did.
Words just come out.
Report of the office manager, Amy? Anything?
Well, I did receive an email from Samantha. She's the one that's going to be doing the farmer's market. And she had mentioned that Mondays, she was looking to have the market on Mondays from 4 to 7 p.m. She was going to start on the 25th of June, and it was going to be going until September 3rd. Some of the vendors that she is looking at is Stone Fox Farm Creamery, Little River Farm, Mother Ward Farm, Belfast Area Homeschool Co-op, Blackbrook Farm, Ancestral French Soaps, Marnie's Dough.
Marnie's
Dough. Those are some of the things that she did provide her certificate. She has done everything that we've needed as far as paperwork, so everything's looking A-okay.
Wonderful. I would just say that if you're the primary point communicating with her, that you say what was said at the last meeting, which is that any way she can devise to get people to come there is to her benefit. So signage is a good idea out on Route 1 and Bayside Road.
I have seen some signs up at the end of Crossroad. I don't know if it is for another market in the area.
It's for another market, it's not for them.
Okay.
Anything else?
I want to thank everyone for wanting to pay their bills. I've had multiple asks if a payment is due this month, and actually I told them that no, there's no payment due this month, but it will be coming out in July. So I just wanted to thank everybody for being proactive. There is one date coming up that the office is going to be open just slightly later, only because I want to sign my son up for boat sailing classes.
Good.
So June 25th, I might be here around 10 because I want to set him up for the sailing.
Got it.
And just a reminder that vacation in July is kind of coming up. I know both me and Bill will be doing some vacationing, so of course there might be some office downtime in July. That's July. And other than that, that's it.
Are there any new signups for events upstairs in the community hall or anything?
Not in June. Everything that I believe you all got the Bayside Arts line up was everything that's happening besides all the committee meetings.
Great.
I did have a question. So I did get the circular for the Bayside Arts, and I noticed that they were charging for a number of the events this year.
I didn't get the circular, so I will have to say I was not on that list.
And I just, and I just wasn't sure what our policy was in terms of the rental for the community hall when the event was actually being charged for by the organization sponsoring the event.
Other organizations obviously charge to attend classes or do things upstairs.
And do we charge that? So I was under the understanding, and I may just be misunderstanding it, that if we waive the rent on the community hall for an event, that the expectation was that the group was not charging for the activity.
I don't think it was that black and white. I think that the effort, and I think it's still in flux and still something that Bayside Arts and the village overseers are still grappling with. Recognizing that Bayside Arts is, I always use the example of the three-legged stool, and now we have a four-legged stool. We have the yacht club, the village, the historical society, and now Bayside Arts, which contribute to our quality of life. We put Bayside Arts in that category of we don't charge the yacht club, we don't charge the historical society. There was this very concern about, well, they're bringing in outside groups, they're advertising outside, they're charging. I don't think we resolved ultimately what we expect in exchange for that when they're going to charge. So I think we need to talk about it more.
Yeah, so I don't know if we have to do it at this meeting, but I know that we had talked about it last year, especially in respect for the masters. And the masters ended up asking for a donation instead of charging a specific entrance fee. So again, I agree with you. I was not clear on what our policy was, and I think that we do have to come up with a policy and just be consistent.
I think that we should specifically invite John or Bill to come next time with the calendar in front of us and say, explain to us your thinking in charging for this use, and then work it through. I mean, sometimes the charging is because they have an expense that they haven't asked us to contribute to in the way we contribute to the yacht club band or something. So, but we only have, I think, $750 in the budget for community events. So,
and some of the events, I thought, not that it's, I'm not making any sort of judgment, but I think some of the charges were on the order of $10 or $15 as an entrance fee. And again, I just, if we're waiving our fee and there is a charge going, I think we just need to understand how all this works.
Yeah.
And what the relationship.
I'll make a note to invite Bayside Arts to present at our next meeting.
What about the yacht club pancake breakfast? They charge.
That's right. That's
Right.
true.
Yeah.
right?
And that's and it is a fundraiser for
The Salem School.
the Salem School.
Yeah, I'm just saying,
Right.
we go across the board.
Right,
Not
right.
just focus on the.
Right, exactly. That's why my four-legged stool example that I always come up with, we want to assure that those organizations are treated on a par, because although it's a new organization, it's a valued organization. But we want to watch the numbers.
Well, just so I understand, will we also want the yacht club to present regarding on the same issue? Or do we first want to understand how Bayside Arts justifies its programming and its costing, and then make a decision out of that?
Right, I think that my view is I would like Bayside Arts to first explain, because it's a much more intensive use of this,
Exactly.
of this entity.
That's a big point.
The pancake breakfast is one day a year.
We are putting in a new circuit just for those griddles for one day.
There may be other uses, there may be other uses.
Right, and we,
And it is a fundraiser, which is in some respects different than.
Well, Bayside Arts is a 501c3, I believe. So presumably, no one's moving to Buenos Aires on what they're making there, it's going back into the organization.
right. All right, well, I think I would like to sit down and talk with John and Bill about that some more. I think it's a fair point.
Well, and I think that there's a little bit more upkeep and wear and tear on our structure from their events than there is the one pancake breakfast. So there is that, like you said, it's a heavier use, so we need to consider that.
Right.
My point was not that it was exclusive to the
Right.
to the arts.
Just
Judy?
to supplement Amy's report, because under her hat is the use of the community hall. I hope you noticed the rules of use posted in the bathroom and upstairs. Very simple rules reminding people to clean up after themselves, basically. Amy's going to be making sure that those rules of use are appended to each of the users' applications for use, so that they can be reminded that they take out their own trash, they don't allow smoking, they don't allow drinking, and ultimately reminds them all that we're not their event manager, we're not here to make sure their bridal shower or whatever is the best thing ever. So it's really, and I like it's lavender.
If you have any issues, call Judy.
So it's, I think that's great that you took the initiative to get that done.
Thank you.
There was actually a request that just came in.
Oh, is this Gail? I was
Yeah,
wondering.
for Gail. She was just looking to have a on August 6th, which I checked my calendar to make sure there was no conflicts, and there isn't, from 7 to 9. She's just needing to use the community hall for 2 hours for a dance class party.
Great.
Yep, I move that we approve that application with the appropriate fees and whatever. Got it.
Is there a second?
What was the use?
It's the Scottish dance
Yes.
group that they were here last year too.
Yes.
And we weren't even aware that they were here. They were so clean and kind.
I'll second it.
Seconded by Mike. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor? It's unanimous. Is that it?
That is it.
Okie dokie. We move to committee reports. Communications, Ms. Metcalf?
Communications, I just want to say again, we rely heavily on Danny, and he's great, and with Amy's addition here and getting her notices out has been really great. Particularly the out of office has been a good thing that she initiated. We talked about that in April. I see it's working because I sent her requests and I'm like, oh shoot, she's not in.
Right.
But at least we know.
And you know it's not gonna happen until the next day.
Right.
Which is
No, I
fine.
think it's great.
Yeah.
And for those of you who ever happen to look at one of the boards we have around the village, they're extremely up to date in terms of upcoming committee meetings, or overseer meetings, etc. Amy's doing a great job keeping those fresh. Finance Committee.
Oh, well, Finance Committee, at this point, the Finance Committee serves as a listening board, I think, for Steve. Steve has things in such great order that once a month, I'll get a request saying I want to bounce something off of you, and then if I remember to answer, I give him my answer. And he's very good about reaching out.
Governance Committee, rather, still Judy.
Governance Committee, we have one action item, and then a report. The action item is the fire ordinance. You'll recall that we, over the winter draft, looked hard at our existing fire ordinance. We had a public hearing in April. Yeah, because I was gone in May. And got some very good community input about the draft that was circulated. As a consequence of the community input, in particular, we made 3 changes to the draft that we had first circulated. We had received comments, particularly about the fire pit concerns. And so the draft that is in front of you, and I'll talk about a change that's going to happen in a moment, specifically says that instead of 75 feet from any dwelling or structure, it now says from a neighboring or abutting dwelling or structure, that the homeowner ought not to be limited in their right to use their own property if they're 75 feet away.
So it's okay to burn their own house down.
Yes,
Exactly.
that's exactly right. Although, as a consequence of that, we added that all fire pits, regardless of where they are, have to have the screen that if you buy it at Home Depot, they have those little screens, because that helps balance the safety issue. That was one specific benefit that came out of the public hearing. It was really useful to have people talk about that. Particularly, an analogous change was the gentleman from down on Bayside Road who talked about brush piles and, like, you know, if I'm going to do my brush pile, shouldn't it be in the context of my property? And so we changed that to neighboring or abutting property as well. And then the third piece was, okay, we had a specific conversation about who's responsible for violating. And we had talked about the balance of the landlord who is making, advertising their property with, you know, oh gee, we have a fire pit, or oh gee, you can have a bonfire on the beach. And so we want those people to be responsible, of course, for violating the ordinance. But we also want to make sure it's not just the owner, it's the tenants of the property. So in front of you is the final draft, except that you will see I'm going to make a request by way of motion that there be 3 changes because the governance committee looked at it one more time yesterday and said, ooh, this is a better word. So if you will turn to page 2 under local ordinance, item 3, it says in the 1, 2, 3rd.
Wendy, there's extras down there. Would you pass that? I didn't give it to the officers.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Item 2, the 3rd line says neighboring structure. We ultimately decided that didn't sound like a unusual word, so we're changing that to abutting.
Can you explain where you
Where
are?
are we on this page?
Page
Second
2
page,
of the document, under local ordinance, paragraph 3, third line,
No fire pits.
where it says neighboring, change
Okay.
that word to abutting. Please turn to page 3, paragraph 7. Last line, it says, this is where we're talking about the bird, the brush pile. Unless the fire is located more than 75 feet from, again, neighboring will not be there, and it'll say abutting.
What's the difference?
Because neighboring could be 2 houses over, you're still your neighbor, right?
Right, we just felt abutting was the term that is used in ordinances to describe a neighbor.
It's more specific.
More specific.
Well, these lots are so small,
So-
a secondary abutter,
Well,
it might not meet the 75-foot setback.
Right, so you wouldn't be able to burn there.
well, I have a question then. Say the folks at Auditorium Park wanted to have a fire pit and put a screen on it, and they went down and got a permit, and everybody was there and agreed to it, and it's within 75 feet of all the structures, can they have that in the village? Why not?
Because it's a violation of the ordinance, it's not safe. And because everybody agrees to it, are you sure that the person with asthma really did agree, or were they just?
I'm just saying, by wording it this way, do we set ourselves up that people could do that, is my question.
No, I don't believe we do.
It's prohibited within, unless the fire is located more, prohibited means prohibited. It doesn't mean, if everybody sits there and says, yeah, sure, it's fine, it's still not okay. It's prohibited.
Right.
So basically, you can't have fire pits within the core part of the village. I mean, that's what this ordinance basically says, so.
Where does it say that?
that's the intent.
That's the intent.
Well, that's what it says.
That's what the goal was, right?
That's the
I'm just
intent.
saying, I think this wording allows groups of people to get together around their house and build a fire in the village. That's what I read.
Under paragraph 3,
Yeah, that's my only thought. I'm not saying I'm advocating for that, I'm just
it says
saying.
no fire pits, fireplaces, or by any name are allowed to be used anywhere within the geographic limits of the village except those more than 75 feet from an abutting structure. That says no.
Unless you can meet the 75-foot setback.
Unless, right.
Never direct.
So in your example, Mike, one of the pieces of property would have to meet that requirement that they were 75 feet from an abutting property.
Okay,
And there's no one
all right.
there that.
We
Okay,
all go to,
good,
we all go to
I'm
the
just
village.
checking, I just
Yeah.
wanted to make sure that was the
Yeah.
case.
Look
Okay.
at the village, yeah.
And then the third
Except for
change,
the-
the third change that is recommended by the governance committee is paragraph 8. This is the responsibility of who's liable. It is the responsibility of the property owner that any occupants, as opposed to tenants, are aware of this ordinance and that their behavior is in compliance with the ordinance. It was reminded that people like me never have tenants, but they have lots of family. So we're changed. So and then paragraph 8.
Changing the word
I know
tenants.
you're flying, I don't want to slow you down.
Paragraph 8, take out the word tenants and substitute it with occupants.
Yeah.
Other than that, this is precisely the ordinance that was amended as a consequence of the public hearing. And I would move that the overseers approve the fire ordinance as amended today.
So, just that, there are a few typos in it, Judy, so I'm assuming that the typos will
Yeah,
get
all.
fixed as well.
Yeah, and if you want to point it out, that would be helpful.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Is there a second to that motion to approve this
I
ordinance?
just had to do that, because I had all those revised.
When you do.
Is there a second? Wendy seconds. Any discussion? Paul?
I think we should have a chance to read it over.
Well, this has been actually the same ordinance that the overseers have had since the April meeting.
So I'm sorry to interrupt, but the only changes from what was sent after we had the public hearing on it are, I think, it was, you know, so it was changed based on the public hearing, and then here these 3 wording changes based from what we saw maybe a month or so ago.
Right.
I mean, I would like to read it over too, but we're also getting into fire burning times. So
Right.
we need to make a decision soon.
Paul?
The last page also says adopted August 14th, 2007.
That's when the ordinance was originally adopted, August 14, 2007. If we amend it today, it'll say August, it'll say June, whatever today is,
Okay.
17th of 2017. That's to remind us all that we've had a fire ordinance in place for 10 years, 11 years, and the reason we're doing this now is because we have seen that that ordinance needed to be improved to be clearer, and we hope this is clearer.
Yeah, I mean, I really like the fact that we have the state law thing up front now, because that's, to me, really helpful, because everybody had a different opinion of what was allowed and what wasn't allowed.
Paul?
What about the abbreviated version of this? The thing we're going to put on the refrigerators?
So, I'll talk about that for 1 minute. I think that, by the way, on that last item we were discussing, the change, item 8, it's responsibility of the property owner that the occupants are aware of this ordinance. Are aware of means that it is the responsibility of the property owners to make sure that all of the occupants therein are aware of. Now, many people here are the owners and the occupants. Once they're aware of it, that's fine. But we're going to have to promulgate this in a variety of ways. Now, what it says at some point in here, Paul's referring to a one-page kind of FAQ version of this ordinance that I've created, and we're going to make this available in a variety of ways. So there is the ordinance, the official version, and there's the one-page, put it on your refrigerator version, all right? Both of them, this has all the detail, this has what you need to know. And so what we will be doing is we'll have stacks of these here in the office. We will make them available online through Danny's website, baysidemaine.com. We'll make sure that he has a special version that goes out. We'll make them available to the major renters of properties in this area, the companies that lease. And it's my intent, actually, that at some point during the early part of the summer, that I get out there with a couple of youngsters and put a copy of this in the front door of every house in Bayside, so that nobody can say, I never saw that thing. At least we'll make it available. And on this one-page version, it says, the full version is available in the office here. So the intent is to get this out as widespread as possible, and I'll take that upon myself to make that happen within the next few weeks, assuming it gets approved. But this one-page version essentially picks up the key points here. Okey doke?
So I moved, I don't know if we had a second.
We had a second from Wendy. So any further discussion on the fire ordinance changes?
I'd just like to table it for 10 minutes while I finish reading it. Is that okay?
Sure. I go on to just the rest of the.
Yeah, if you just do that, I'll be done with it.
The only other thing for governance committee is that we met, you know that one of the things that we were charged with a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, was a review of all the ordinances. We never got to the zoning ordinance last year. We convened in a workshop yesterday to start that process. We'll be meeting essentially every 2 weeks throughout the summer for, we hope, small bites of time to work on that process, and we'll keep you advised as to what we've accomplished.
And it's quite likely that 2019 is when recommendations will come around in terms of any changes to that ordinance. Paul?
What about architectural review? Are we going to make a stand on that, or where are we?
The initial conversation yesterday was the allocation of the sections of the existing ordinance, review of the existing ordinance, and tasking each member of the committee, which by the way is John, me, Dick, Tim, Blair, with resourcing how we can make it better. Architectural review was a word that was thrown around yesterday, but we were just at the initial stages.
So it's still going to be evaluated.
There will be ample opportunity for the public and overseers to weigh in terms of changes to the ordinance.
What's the sentiment? Do we have
No,
a
I don't think that there was a collection of sentiment yesterday. Yesterday was, we have to, thank you, we have to do this work. How are we going to allocate this work amongst ourselves?
Yeah, because the current one is what, 35, 40 pages. So
Right. It's a weighty document. We're at the front end of it.
Yeah.
Anything else regarding governance committee, Judy?
No, we addressed the elections for annual meetings in the context of the warrant.
Thank you. And we we can return to that vote still later on. Mr. Lannon, I know you're reading, but
I can go on to safety.
thank you. We'll jump to Safety Committee now, Wendy.
Okay, so first I want to thank my safety committee. Many of the members are here. They have been tireless in their support of various activities that we've done. So Beanie, Gina, Michael, Jim, and Harry have been just greatly supportive of the activity that we're doing. So one of the things that we will need is a motion to hire the lifeguards and the police officer. The recommendation is the hiring of Evan and Mackenzie. They will both have their waterfront certifications. The approved salary is $15 an hour. They would start working on, I think that's Monday, June 25th. We would have them go probably through Labor Day with some reduced hours, maybe during the end of August, to reflect the fact that the village is not as busy. It will be full week coverage, 10 a.m. to 5 p.m., 7 days a week.
So moved.
That was a motion and it was a second. Any discussion on the hiring of the lifeguards? All in favor? I will have to go there. It's unanimous. Kiko?
Okay, the second is the hiring of the police officer for the summer, Michael Boucher. You may all be familiar with him. He was our summer police officer a couple of years ago. We have checked his references. He does come highly recommended. We're requesting $25 an hour, again, for him to start the week of, I believe maybe even that weekend before June 25th, so that he can, get things started.
And then through around Owlsboro?
And yes, through around Owlsboro.
And the date of that is?
September 8th. It's the weekend after Labor Day.
And how many hours a week? I'm sorry, did you say?
So up to 40 hours a week.
Up to 4. And the safety committee will be in touch with him
And he'll come in once the overseers approve it. He will do the normal, come in, talk to Amy, get all the paperwork done. There are some additional things that we have to do in order to be in compliance as a police department. We will address those things, as we need to, and those fall under the materials associated with the police office.
Understood. Second for that motion?
Second, and can I ask a question?
Go right ahead.
Can someone remind me, because the name was familiar, who was Michael?
2 years ago?
Good.
2 years ago?
2 or 3 years
He
ago?
was here for 2 years.
He was
Okay.
after, 3 years ago. He was after.
Not the state police, that state capitol police guy.
No.
No.
That was last
This
year.
he was after.
Not the SWAT team, the SWAT team's that could.
Yeah, that's what- Thank you.
No, and I just, I'll comment, he definitely, he understands Bayside. He definitely is a community policing perspective. We definitely talk to him. He's not going to be sitting out on Cross Street just giving tickets. He understands the things that we're trying to enforce. We expect to have a varied schedule so that we're dealing with things that happen in the evening as well as during the day. And so I think we are going back to the type of police officer that we're interested in.
Yeah, and I don't ask to second guess, I just wanted some comfort.
Yeah.
Further discussion, Paul?
I think he's an excellent candidate, but 2 questions. What's his start date? And is he still employed by Belfast?
No, he's not employed by Belfast, so he would just be working, for us this summer in this capacity. He may be taking on other side jobs, but again, we're just employing him for the, somewhere between 30 to 40 hours a week. He would start, we have to talk to him, but we probably would start the weekend, so the 22nd or 23rd of June.
Of June.
Next
Of
weekend.
June.
Next week.
Which is soon.
Good.
Further discussion?
I hope we can do something about the speeders on Bluff Road and Shore Road.
So the safety committee has discussed with him what the issues are. So I do expect for them to be addressed.
We can move the car on something.
That's what I'd like to do.
I for one was sad that I didn't trigger the speed limit when I was taking my walk. I was working really hard, I saw the sign, and did my best.
You gotta walk like 10 long strides.
Yeah.
I do have one suggestion, but change to this.
Okay, can we?
We have a vote.
I'm sorry, we're in the
on
middle of
safety.
something. I thought we voted.
No. Any further discussion? All in favor? That's unanimous. Before we move on, anything else?
So there are just a couple other things with the safety committee, so can we we?
Please.
Yeah, let's do that first.
So the other thing that we wanted to let you know is that we're having a safety fair on July 4th from 11 to 2 p.m. It's going to be down in the village center. The safety committee has lined up a list of people who provide services to the community that will be there. I will provide a more formal list to the group. It's the animal control officer. We've reached out to, I believe, and please correct me, Waldo County Sheriff's Department. Michael Boucher will be there. The lifeguards will be there. So what we're trying to do is make sure that the villagers have an understanding of the support structure that we have here. Oh, the fire chief will be there. The support structure that we have from a safety standpoint, so that they understand that they can leverage these other people in terms of providing the safety for the community. What we would like is to ask for $100 from the overseers to pay for refreshments, so that we can be popular, so that people will come. And I think, getting back to your point, John, this is a great place for us to put the various flyers, so that, you know, people can pick up these things to put on your refrigerator. And so it's if it goes well,
That's
we
a
may.
double whammy. You also drop them at the door and you have them there.
So I think it's a good way for us to interact with the community, and if it's successful, we may try to do it each year.
I guess we need a motion for that $100, it's over 50, so.
But before you do that, I'm looking, I think that's in your budget.
Yeah, I think the communications,
Okay.
Then there's no motion
Okay.
necessary.
So just, if you want to continue, I'll get back to you in a second.
Okay.
Anything else?
so yes, it's.
No, so the last thing, and I had hoped to have it for this meeting, we're recommending an update of the safety brochure. And so that's something, I don't know if we want to come back and have that approved in a formal meeting, or if that's something that we could do via email. That we just felt, again, that was a good way to get the information out. You can put it on your refrigerator. One of the things, again, from the safety committee is finding that the villagers do not understand that you can call the state police, that you can call the sheriff's department, that you can call animal control, and that by updating this brochure to have that information, it could be very helpful for the community.
Great idea.
Do you have any idea about costs?
For printing it, no.
Because I think we have room in the budget for that as well.
Okay.
So I don't think that requires an overseer's approval. Unless the
Unless you're gonna make
overseers
up rules.
want to do it.
I thought about it, but
Yeah, no violence.
Anything else?
Nope, that's,
So 3, Paul?
Regarding the cruiser,
oh, sorry, the last was it has been this recommendation, you know, that there's the option to purchase a second cruiser. I didn't,
Which it
sorry.
sounded like was down to $1,000 is what I was
So
hearing.
to replace the current cruiser with this other cruiser that's for sale.
For only $1,000.
We have to dispose also of a cruiser rather than have it sit behind Billy's house, right?
so we have a working cruiser. Should be good for a 3 more years.
But are we gonna get another one for $1,000 in 3-4 years?
Who knows?
Is it, so
Steve?
just, Steve.
I mean, if it were my money, I'd buy it, I'd ditch the old one and move on.
Yeah.
We have reserves that were dedicated to that purpose. We're going to upgrade the vehicle by 10 years, give or take a little bit. It comes fully equipped. There will be some expenses to decommission the other one, but Bill's talked about possibly selling it. We might get $1,000 out of it.
Right.
But what we have to do is eliminate the police equipment and everything else. So there's some cost, but the costs from my perspective are negligible. And if we can upgrade the vehicle by 10 years, I think we're absolutely wrong not to do so.
Judy?
So you talked about that in the context of a warrant. Since we already have a reserve fund, which would not be exhausted, do we need it on the warrant?
What we've always done is made sure that the money is approved because it's in reserves. And even though it's dedicated to reserves, we ask the voters to approve the use of it. So my answer would be yes.
So the decision, if we recommend doing that, it still couldn't be acted upon until August?
That's correct.
Is it going to still be available in August?
Yeah, I don't remember having the purchase of the current one as a warrant article.
I think it was.
Yeah. But,
I don't know where to go with this right now. Either it is or it isn't.
It may be too late, maybe,
What?
if you wait until August.
August, right.
Cruiser may be gone.
I think the previous one,
So
Wait.
I can, we, In this year's budget, we are still holding roughly $5,000 in contingency. The thought being that we have washouts or something we didn't expect. You could certainly use that money
And then pay ourselves back.
and pay ourselves back, assuming that the villagers approve it during a vote.
I move that we act upon the offer to purchase the Hampton Falls Fire Department vehicle for not more than $1,000. Is that, am I squeezing
Is it a
this
red
right?
vehicle or is it a blue cruiser?
It's not fire, please.
Oh, okay.
She said fire.
One second,
You said
it feels
fire.
like there's a
I
price
have
issue.
fire on the brain, because you're ordinance.
Yeah.
Wait, can we get the dollar figure set? Tim, is that what you're referring to?
Two things. One is the purchase price is $1,500.
Okay.
There's a donation to the village corporation of $500, so the net. But in that motion, I would suggest that you authorize, at the same time, Billy to look to dispose of the current one with the
Yeah, I was
proceeds
actually
from
gonna
that.
do that as a separate motion because that's disposal is gonna have some costs associated with it in terms of removing the equipment.
We don't know what that is yet. So I would agree that I'd like to keep this motion specifically about the purchase.
But if it's 1,500, I think
It's
that
gonna be $1,500 because that's the,
the purchase price,
The
sorry.
purchase price is $1,500
Yeah.
with the unit. So, you want to,
And you can
Why
hold
don't we do
the other
that?
one until the next meeting.
Yeah.
You want to redo that?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I move that we purchase the vehicle that's been offered to us by Hampton Falls, is it Hampton Falls, for no more than $1,500.
there's a second. Wendy, any further discussion? Paul?
What will the cost be to refit? Or can that be something that we can accommodate in our current budget? Or is that going to be an unexpected expense to refit?
Safety committee, is there,
I don't understand.
This is the new cruiser,
Yeah.
it's fully equipped.
It's full.
There is no refit.
No, I'm talking about signage, et cetera,
Oh, you say big sign on the
registration,
sign.
et cetera.
Well, registration's $35. The painting, what did it cost us last time to paint
I
it?
was trying to think.
We need to be inspected, right?
Technically, no, but we do inspect it.
Good idea.
I'm not sure what we spent on lettering, it wasn't much.
Well, remember, bear in mind that we have it's a $1,500 purchase with a $500 donation, so it's actually only costing us $1,000, so we have wiggle room of $500 for making it the Bayside cop car.
yes. So I think we're covered in that regard. Further discussion? All in favor of this purchase? It's unanimous, thank you. Now, do you want to have a separate motion on the
Yeah.
disposal
Then, you said we'll wait until next month, so we have the
Yeah,
details
you
of what that
should
costs.
just authorize Wendy to spend her $100 on refreshments. It's not in the budget this year.
of, oh, it's not? I thought you said it was coming out of hers.
I took a look and it's not in there.
Okay, I move that we spend up to $100 on refreshments on July 4th for the safety fair.
Second?
Yes.
Mike Flanagan,
Do
second.
you want
Any
me to
discussion?
make things for you?
All in favor? That's approved. Got that, Amy?
I have another question on the cruiser.
Keep going.
Prior to the cop taking over, which would be near term now, there's been a lot of speeding on the roads. And I suggested via email 2 or 3 weeks ago that maybe we should move the cruiser around to try to slow down some of the speeders. I never got a response, and Bill is pessimistic about that idea. I just thought I'd throw that out for discussion. Is that something we want to do in the future, prior to the season's opening?
In the next week, in other words.
No, next year,
Oh, in 2019.
yeah.
But we're not going to do it now.
Wendy?
So, I did see the email, Paul and I should have put it on the list for the safety committee. I don't recommend that we do that. I think, from a logistics standpoint, that we're asking a bit much of our village employees to, move the cruiser, and then, you gotta get back to where the cruiser is.
I'll do it. I'll
that
volunteer.
Our, I think that our, yeah, I think that
Not sure to drive.
that our employees have, other things that they're doing as well. What I would like to see that maybe the safety committee take up and then make a recommendation to the overseers, and I understand that there would definitely be costs associated with this, but maybe expanding the police coverage that we have in the village. And maybe even having a discussion with the town of Northport that maybe it would make sense to have some additional level of coverage, both for the speeding issues as well as we had a lot of thefts last year in the off-season. So again, if you think of where we invest our money and where we take care of both the village and contribute to the town of Northport, that this is something that we could do in a way that might actually be cost effective. And do exactly what you're talking about, Paul, in terms of really deterring speeders, as well as increasing the level of safety and reducing vandalism in our
Since
area.
I didn't hear anything back from any of the members here, I called the sheriff's department, and he's come down a couple of times to monitor the road.
Great.
And last year I was in
And
touch
that
with
doesn't
Bill.
cost us anything.
Right.
Right, and I have been with, I think it's Deputy Chief Trundy, I've been in touch with him. He seems, very willing to work with us. He understands some of the concerns that we have, and so I do think that that liaison with both the Waldo County Sheriff's Department as well as with the state police, I think can serve us quite well in terms of actually clamping down. And we know that they will give tickets, and that some of these, especially very high tickets, are going to be what actually discourages us.
Well, somebody has to be the squeaky wheel, because otherwise they'll just ignore,
Mike?
go on to other things.
I do think there's a benefit to having a cruiser in a couple of strategic places. Maybe it's not moving all around the village, but I think that especially you get into this time of year, there are so many people that come up Shore Road, and they're passing through once. And they're cruising along on Shore Road because they're just looking around, and they don't even realize that they're coming into the village. And having the car in front of the community hall here, I think, people see that and they just slow down coming into the village. So I think it's a nice thing to do. There's no reason, where do you keep it when the police officer's not here? Anyway.
In the garage. In the garage we have, but right now it's not in the garage because I haven't had enough time to put the snow plow and the sander away, so there's no room for it in the garage.
So let's park it in front of the community hall, would be my thought.
Yeah.
All right, I think that we're picking up in the next few days a police officer who is familiar with this village. And I think it's quite possible to have a conversation and learn from him what his suggestions are, what works in other communities, and with limited resources, what we might do here. I think that
We can
he
table
would be a
it
resource to
let's
draw.
table it till then. But I think it's a good idea.
Billy has a comment.
Oh, sorry, Bill?
Can I just say what my feelings on when Paul come to me about it was? I don't know for sure, okay? You only have one place on the Shore Road that the Village Corporation owns. You only have the community hall, you have the parks, and we have our side streets. Now, if you're gonna place that car on one of the town roads, I don't think that I am qualified to do that because I am not a police officer. I am representing a police officer by moving that vehicle around. So I would want that legality investigated. That's why I don't do that. I am authorized to drive that vehicle around, but I cannot place it for purposes.
So maybe we can have the police officer do it this summer, or maybe we don't do it at all. But I like your idea of talking about it, and then we can move on.
I do think it's a micromanagement issue.
Yes,
And I
it
think
is.
the more we talk on camera about strategically placing a vacant vehicle, the more people know that that vehicle they come upon is vacant.
But I'm worried more about people that are passing through.
Maybe
Before
we should buy another sign, a digital sign.
This is for suggestions for the safety committee.
Yes.
Before we move on,
Yes.
I would like to thank the safety committee, as they annually have done, for diligently bringing to us lifeguards and a police officer. I know it is not an easy task. I know that Ms. Huntoon has talked about how the safety committee might not in fact be, in the future, the appropriate mechanism for either the hiring or the oversight of these people, and that perhaps this should be official village business. And so that is something that we're going to be talking about in terms of removing the load from volunteers for overseeing this year in, year out. But nonetheless, I'm gratified to see that you've been successful one more year. I also hope that, as I said regarding the farmers market, that you will find some ways to get the word out about the safety fair such that we can maximize attendance at that. And it would have to help in any way. let's return to the governance committee. I believe, Mike, you've had a chance to look at that?
I did, yeah, I only have one suggested, add one word in two places on the last page, item 6. I believe the intent here is on B, or the one that was scratched out of B. I don't really understand. Is that not supposed to be struck?
It's not, this is one
Yeah,
of the
okay, that's
typos
just a
that we,
typo.
yeah, that's the
All
red
right,
line.
so then in B, I would add the word upland in between any and vegetation in 2 places in there, because I believe the goal is not to keep it 25 feet from seaweed.
So the recommendation is that where it currently says shall be located at campfires from any vegetation, or the combustible matter be from any upland vegetation or other.
Right, because that's the intent. The intent is not things that are below the sea 50% of the time.
I
I'm fine with
don't
that.
know what
Okay.
Bill is of it.
What's that?
So that's okay with you?
That's
Yeah,
okay with
Because
me.
we
That's the
couldn't
bank.
have.
What we're trying to do is make sure that the tree and the bank doesn't catch on fire.
Exactly, that's what I'm getting at.
So we let that change it.
Yeah, I was pausing because I've never heard of seaweed referred to as vegetation, but you're right, it is a living plant, so.
I,
Well,
let's
that's
not
or,
find out.
it doesn't say
Let's find
and.
out. Now, I
Okay,
believe.
so that's it, that's all I have.
So
Okay.
any further discussion on approving this ordinance with the changes? Understood that Judy's gonna get some edits in terms of
Right, so
copy.
Wendy had some typos, I have some typos that I've noticed. Please, let me know the typos.
Okay.
Because what we'll do, well, if we approve this, is we will get this posted on the bulletin boards immediately. Danny will get it immediately. It'll be effective immediately. And I also just want to remind everyone that this is just a piece of the safety puzzle. In addition to all that, we also have a fireworks ordinance. July 4th is coming up. You can't use fireworks in the village. So,
Those candle lit paper balloon things are considered fireworks
Yeah.
by the state.
yeah.
I don't know if anybody realizes it, but they are.
Oh, the things that people do at weddings
And
and
that is,
stuff.
Yeah.
So, all in favor of the ordinance as will be corrected?
Yes.
That's unanimous, thank you. And we've had safety. Mike, we're gonna move on to the infrastructure committee
Okay,
report.
the good news is we're gonna be quick because we talked about a bunch of these things already, so. We've talked about North Ave, we've talked about all the roads ad nauseum. So I think the only thing we really haven't talked about much is the seawall. We received a draft presentation / report on Thursday. The infrastructure committee met on Friday and we went over it. We have some edits that I will be forwarding on Monday to the committee. It's over there, to the engineer. It's over there if anybody wants to take a look at it. We did decide yesterday, we have been discussing when exactly we would be doing the seawall construction. And I think from a budgeting point of view and so on, we're now looking at 2020, not 2019. So the plan would be that in 2019, we would do all the design and everything. And we would propose it at the 2019 meeting at that point for approval. We'd have firm numbers, and that was what we like at that point. So that's the process. We did meet, and the committee did sort of vote on the alternatives sort of as is, just to see where we are. It was sort of a straw poll. And we were not unanimous in our decisions, so it'll be interesting what the discussion is next week. But I encourage everyone to come 9 a.m. on the 23rd. It will be upstairs. Amy and I need to work on some logistics there. Regina Leonard from our engineering forum is going to do the presentation. She's going to do a PowerPoint presentation, and then we'll have a discussion afterward. So the intent is to come out of that meeting sort of with the idea of what the alternative is that we're going to move forward with, and then obviously then there still are a bunch of details to work out in the design. It's to figure out whether we really want a wall or a stone revetment, or if it's going to be wood or concrete, or and so on. I think that's the goal for this meeting.
And what will the public be asked to vote upon, if anything, at the annual meeting?
I don't think will be anything to vote on at this point. Do you?
Am I correct? I just want to make sure that's clear, that the annual, Steve?
You have a warrant that will have them vote for design.
Designs.
Yes, and then
But yeah,
that'll be,
that's
actually, that should be
$25,000.
for the preferred solution at that point. so-
Preferred solution, so at the annual meeting, there will be one preferred solution that the public will be voting on.
Yes,
That's
that's it.
that warrant right now, it's called 15.
Yes, that's the goal, is to get to that, so that then we're only focusing our money and efforts on the one design.
Thank you.
Mike, I would recommend that we would suggest to, if you could, the government,
Actually, you want, you gotta do it, but you could
You
sign.
guys quite down just a little.
and screw.
I'm sorry?
We're fully equipped for PowerPoint presentation.
Oh, good.
So they should,
Poorly equipped, he said, not fully. So bring their own projector and screen.
That's what she wants to know.
So I have a projector and a screen.
Okay.
So.
Here?
Yeah, I can get it here. So,
Okay.
but I'll follow up with you on it. If I can't find it, I'll let you know.
She should have one, but.
She should have one too. I'll just tell her to bring her stuff.
we should have.
Yeah. Great.
Initial, I guess.
Just open them if you want to take a. Anything else, Mike?
No,
Not on that, but.
no, that's it.
How about tree?
Yeah, we can do that all.
Oh, well, no,
Yeah.
we have town liaison.
Right.
Sorry, skipping.
Safety committee, we've done. Town liaison, Paul?
A couple of things. Wendy circulated or forwarded an email from the town manager, which was kind of interesting. The town is looking for some committee participation. They want people on the zoning board, the planning board, and people who work on the polls. And I thought that was a good informational email to send around. You can contact the town clerk at the town office if you're interested in any of those positions. The only,
Paul, can I just make a comment?
Sure.
One of the committees that they're looking for is broadband internet committees.
yeah.
And I continue to get people to send me emails saying that they want me to form a new broadband internet company here for the village. I do that as a living, so I'm not really interested in doing it for Bayside itself. The proper way of doing it is actually for Bayside to participate with the town, because we can help with the business model, and they probably have some level of unserved or underserved, so they could probably get funding from state or federal sources. So part of the reason I just wanted to make sure that Paul and John were aware of it, in case the village corporation wanted to have a committee member, suggest someone for that committee. That specific committee, I don't think you necessarily have to be a resident of the town of Northport. I think for the zoning and the others that you do have to actually be a resident. And again, it's something that I think that the villagers are very interested in this, as well as in terms of improved internet costs.
So just to restate this, there had been growing discussion here in the village about broadband. There has been through the years, and we have now learned that the town is taking it up. So we are quite happy to pass the conversation over to them, as it were.
And have a liaison.
And have a liaison.
I think it would be in our best interest to have a liaison. I think that there are a number of people in the village who might be interested in doing it. Dan Doucette, who is working on a community broadband in Peabody. Dan Webster has expressed some interest. George Allen is in the business. So he's very experienced in that area, so I think it would be good for us to have some level of representation.
Mike Connors.
I think we have a committee right there.
Mike Connors is the one who proposed the idea with the selectmen, and he's been asked to consider being the chair. Mike Connors, he's a resident of Birchcrest, Summit Avenue, and he certainly wants to be involved. The other thing that came up yesterday I thought was interesting. Steve mentioned the idea of asking the town to increase the $25,000 fee that they send us every year, which I think is a good idea when we're struggling to keep from raising taxes. We go up another $10,000, I think that would be helpful. And Just thought I'd throw it out to see if there's any discussion. Steve?
I did in fact raise that issue. My recommendation is that nothing be done with it until the overseers are ready to address it in a significant sort of way.
Well, that's what I'm doing.
So what are you suggesting?
That we
wanna
discuss,
go visit-
that we discuss it, the viability of it.
So what it requires is a group of you to go meet with the town.
I think we need to
And some
look
preparation.
at our numbers that we've just approved, which is a 3.7 or 3% increase. We need to look at what the town does on their tax bills this year. And then I think it's a worthwhile conversation that requires a sit down with a significant portion of the overseers and a significant portion of selectmen to see if a consensus could be done. But I don't think it's a conversation we should look at just in terms of the pressure on our taxes. We need to look at pressure on our other taxes as well.
Wendy?
And I think it has to be a strategic discussion, and I think that's what you're saying, Judy, that there has to be a reason why we're doing that. And that we have to go armed with a reason why this makes sense, not just, again, to take pressure off on our taxes, but because of that holistic relationship between the village corporation and the town.
Yeah, it can't just be, you know.
Give
because-
me, it has to be.
Because we give you, give it back.
Right, exactly.
So we're not interested in pursuing it.
No,
No, I
that's
think
not what I
we
was hearing
are,
at all.
but
And we're talking about continuum conversations along a continuum, gathering the data, and looking at it from their point of view first, which I think comes up in the context now of the bills we're going to be getting in September. What impact is the town bearing on their tax bills, which also is us. We're all paying those taxes as well. What can we feel as they can absorb? In the same way, the food pantry determines if they're going to ask for 2,500 or 5,000. You know, each of those asking entities need to come with a sense as to what the effect of the ask is on the taxpayers, who are us. So
Right.
we need to be.
So we don't want to take any action today, but we want to continue the discussion month after month after month.
That's not what I was hearing, Paul. What I was hearing, Paul, is that it's more of a strategic discussion rather than a knee-jerk reaction. And so I would interpret this as, if you want to lead this as a discussion, then find the people around this table and have that discussion in this room, or come back with a report of some sort that this group can respond to.
Well, I think it was the treasurer's concept initially, and I think it's a good one.
Then
Yes. Yeah, and I think that there's three pieces. One, what pressures are on the town, recognizing that's also us. Two, do we need to put additional or different pressure on the town? Three, if we're prepared to ask the town for an increased warrant, we also need to have a strategy for ensuring that that warrant is approved by the citizens who will be voting for it. I'm not one of those citizens, so it's all well and good to say to the town, give me more money. Billy gave us an example of how he and Beverly had to really get the troops here 10 years ago when we put it up to 25 from 15, in order to assure that it got passed. So it's a process that we have to assure that we're prepared for. I don't think it's simply, we want more of our money back.
No, but I think it's a good time for it because we do have these pressures, we are doing things. I mean,
Right.
the shoreline is part of Northport too.
Right.
We're rebuilding the
Right.
seawall.
Right.
We redid the wharf. We're doing all these road projects that don't fall under their budget. So there is a rationale for it.
Oh, absolutely.
And I think the discussion is just that it is a good time and that we need to put a subcommittee or an ad hoc committee of the overseers together to come up with a strategic argument with the appropriate data behind it.
Yes.
So that we will be successful. And in fact, given the sequence for both the town of Northport as well as for the village corporation, it's not going to be done in any of the warrants this year. It will have to be next year. So we have plenty of time to
Right.
plan for this.
Right.
Yeah, one of the hazards is that they don't say no, they say hell no, and they don't give us a 25. So, you know, we're in a situation where, I mean,
Yeah,
that
yeah.
$25,000.
You can get a reverse warrant added after it that says we're just gonna pull out the road. You could-
Yep, because they can reduce any warrants.
Yeah. Oh, they can reduce the warrant
Right.
itself?
They can read that, when they vote, when they look at that $25,000 warrant item, which is a separate item, they can say 10.
They can say no.
Unlikely.
Up for the vote.
Well, I like the idea, although the notion of creating committees ad nauseum nauseates me. Nonetheless, I think that to get any motion on this, any action on this, we'll probably have to create a dedicated group of overseers in an ad hoc committee
I think
to address this item.
I would suggest we do that in September. We have a lot going on.
We have plenty of
And
time.
it probably do,
And we have facts then, we will have facts at that point. too.
Right,
That
so,
might want to be chaired by the finance committee.
Might want to.
so, I mean, Paul, I don't think Paul's gonna let this issue go away, so by September, Paul, you bring it up again, I think we can.
It's all bring it up again.
Yeah, yeah.
Now we're gonna move on. Let's see,
Almost there, tree planting.
tree planting committee.
So Vicky's not here today, so I will give the update. We have been moving along. We have come up with a sort of a mission statement and objectives, which is kind of nice. That's been done. The plan is to catalog all the trees in the village, village proper to start. We're not going out into the, as Bill always mentions, you know, there are parts of the village that are much more wooded than this, and we're focusing on the area, really the historic area, pretty much, to start off. It will be 100% volunteer-based. We will be cataloging all the trees. Mike's going to help out there. Yeah, go ahead.
Are we cataloging the entire urban forest or simply the publicly owned trees?
We are starting with the publicly owned trees,
So,
and we are including all the ones, you know, between people's front porches and the road, because those are owned by the village. That has brought up a lot of discussion because, you know, what do we do about trees that are planted there? And planted by homeowners, they plant a tree, and they like the tree, and then when it gets old, they say, well, that's on village property, take it down.
right.
So,
well,
I don't know how we're gonna address that, but
Yeah,
it is
well,
what it is.
and I asked it at that point because of Billy's good reminder to us that, of course, a piece of our village is on Route 1, but there's no public piece on Route 1, so,
Yeah,
yeah,
okay.
I'm not talking about out back here,
right,
the bigger
Right.
forested parts that we don't think about.
right.
Yeah, and there was discussion of, for example, what will we do for the land behind the community hall, for example, and we're not really sure how that fits into all this. So, I would like to make a motion that we spend up to $300 for a global positioning satellite thing, because we're gonna go very low tech with this. We're gonna basically use a spreadsheet, okay? And then we do want to catalog exactly where the trees are, because we want to make sure that later when we have the arborist come, everything's locked into a point. So when we have somebody come and trim, we'll give them the coordinates. If they happen to trim the wrong tree, that's on them, because they had coordinates. So I think the coordinate thing, although we're going to go low tech with just an Excel spreadsheet right now and a map where we physically mark the stuff, having the actual GPS location, I don't think it's okay to use cell phones, which can be plus or minus 10 meters at times, 10 feet at times too. I know we can talk about what that actually is, but the point is that we want to make sure we get the actual location. So that's a motion.
And
Is there a second on that?
second, so that we can discuss it, can we
Judy?
afford that?
No.
I just,
You've got a pile of money in the tree budget that's dedicated for this, that, and the other thing.
The $2,000
yeah.
that we talked about,
Go to
right?
page,
Yeah, except
go
we
to
already
page,
two.
go to page 1 of the budget that you have in front of you with projects.
Taxes, yeah.
Okay.
So you had, and this is from memory, because I've stored mine away, there was, you've asked, there's 4,500 that was in the budget, and so far we've committed to use about 4,200 of it. That's the note to the right.
And
Yeah.
then the 900,
You have discretionary pruning funds for $900.
and then 3,000.
I would say what you end up doing, well, 3,000 is next year, I'm talking this year. I would suggest that you back down a little bit of pruning this year and use those funds to buy the unit.
Okay.
I mean, that's all within the tree thing, I take that approach, because we really literally don't have any more money.
Right.
Okay, I was just going to make this statement that this unit should be used for more than just locating trees. It would be used
Well,
for
we were
all
just
kinds of-
whispering, we were just being rude to you by having our side conversation
That's
about
okay.
that. We don't have a sense right now if the utility department might be able to benefit from the same thing. And in that
Exactly.
context, that would be a cost sharing. But we haven't talked about it among the trustees. We want your point of view and Dick's point of view on that. So there may be ways in August or July that we could be.
Right, so if we went ahead and used the funds that we have available now, we could talk about potentially sharing a piece of it.
Or just defer the request until July, and then the utilities department will have an answer to you as to whether it wants to share. And then you'd be pushing Steve for 150 instead of 300.
Well, you'd just be taking it out of money that's approved for use in the whole arena of trees.
Right.
So you're saying if we go ahead and buy it now, we likely wouldn't get reimbursed, is what you're saying?
No, I think the utilities could still reimburse.
Okay, I would just want, I would want to, Dick, and Billy's nodding, so I think I have the utility department's point of view. Yeah, we're just having a
Well,
lot.
we just have to discuss it in July, so you might be taking a risk that we decide not to reimburse you, but I think we'll put that on the.
We got a lot of trees to catalog, and we have a lot of volunteers here this year, so we do want to get started as soon as
Right,
possible.
but Bill, but Steve's point is that these projects for 2018 that we've just approved are the 4,200, the 3,000 for the additional tree removal, and the 4,200 and 3,000. So we've already put a lot of money into this.
Right, okay.
Could you touch base with me on that offline after
Yes,
this meeting
absolutely.
before you take off?
Yeah, that's
Thanks.
Okay,
So you're withdrawing the motion?
I'll withdraw the motion because we're going to use it
In July.
for July.
Okay.
It's so close. It's just 3 weeks.
Other issues? Tree department, anything else? Tree committee?
I don't know, do you have anything to add, Mike?
No.
Okay. No, I think we're good.
Good. Utility committee?
I'll speak for the utilities. We had the meeting on Friday, David Crawford didn't happen to attend, so I took what notes there were. Basically, the superintendent's report is everything is running fine. We have a great wastewater treatment plant down there. It works better than most of them in the state. Most of them are secondary. We have what is called primary treatment, and almost everybody else has what they call a secondary treatment, where they take what would be the output of our system and run it through another process. And our stuff is so good that it wouldn't benefit by the secondary process. So cross our fingers, guys, but that school sewer department down there is working very, very well. What else do we have?
This action item.
We have an action item, that's correct. Basically, there was a discussion on hydrant locations and where the existing stubs are. There was a motion passed that the utility committee would recommend to the overseers to provide rental for 2 hydrants at Marathon Square and on the South Shore, and also pay for the removal of 2 non-working fire hydrants that are serviced by the fire department.
So the utilities did make the recommendation too, but what was approved by the overseers was one.
Right, that's right. So we approved, and we've already approved the removal of 1, the 1,500, and we've already put a budget together which anticipates the rental of those 2 new additional hydrants.
The utilities department takes the cost of putting all that in.
Right, it's gonna cost us about 6,000 per.
Yeah, the situation with hydrants is interesting, that the utilities owns the hydrant, and we lease it to the village. And so the utilities pay for putting in the hydrants, they pay for taking out hydrants, except for those that are owned by the village. But generally, it's what, $6,000 to put in a hydrant, and the utilities committee has said, we'll put in 2 if you want to pay for the rental. The rental's around $900 a year.
Right, and we did approve that by way of approving the budget.
Yes, yes.
And the recommendation of the 2 locations are the ones to provide the bus coverage for the village. And so one is at Marathon Square, which will cover that area, and then the second one will be down on Bluff Road. Shore Road, across from Maureen O'Keefe's house.
I think it's further up this way.
It's actually gonna be closer to Paul's,
Okay.
because the stub turned out to be closer to this end of the Shore Road.
I gotta double check, and I'll
GPS thing. Very
Well, the GPS thing is good because I get the dictate things all the time for the utilities, for CMP. Everything they send me is in GPS coordinates.
Yeah,
So it
good.
takes me a long time to figure out where they're talking about.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, then,
So regarding the.
we'll lease it to you.
Yeah.
So, regarding
Don't
the,
do me any favors.
the fire pond hydrants, so we've already approved, the overseas have approved taking the one out that's in Ruggles Park. There's a recommendation for taking a second one out that does not have the appropriate water pressure to actually be useful in the event of a fire. The third fire pond hydrant, which is at C Street, that indicates that the water pressure is enough for it to be a useful fire hydrant.
So where's the other one coming out from?
Griffin and George.
Griffin and George. So at the top of Griffin and the bottom of Griffin, essentially, we're going to pull those two.
So,
We don't have
No.
1,500 approved for that, and we don't have the money.
No,
We're only pulling the one.
We're gonna pull the
cross
one at Broadway from.
pulling the one at Broadway,
And we're gonna leave the other one right now.
Right.
leaving it,
Because we don't have the money.
but buying two new ones and installing them. One of them going on Shore Road, one of them going at Marathon Square. That give us a maximum amount of coverage.
Right.
It should be noted also that in the budget that was approved by the overseers half an hour ago, included agreement on the ongoing rentals of these two hydrants, which is $900 or so a year. So together, it's around $1,800 a year per annum to rent these two hydrants, the new ones that are.
so do we need since it's already in the vote?
We don't need
Yeah,
to send
so-
it.
It's already been approved at
That's
this
already
end.
was approved.
But I have a question. It's installation time, because in theory, we have, I think we'd get our first bill in January if you install it this year. So it can be installed anytime in your third trimester for billing into next year.
Right, and Dean Brown's the guy
Please
that
not
organized. Yeah. Dean Brown's the one who does that work for you, and
If you're
so,
doing the digging, yeah.
yeah, so it's a matter of coordinating with Dean.
No, he's gonna be doing the roads.
Everything.
But there is one action item for the utilities.
There was a sewer application applied for a new house at 23 Griffin.
This is it.
This is it?
Yep, so I move that the overseers adopt the recommendation of the trustees to approve the sewer application for a new sewer connection at 23 Griffin.
A second.
Any discussion? All in favor? It's unanimous.
They're within the,
Another new house,
they're within the,
right in the core village.
yes.
And the meeting was adjourned at 3:30.
You have to sign it. All right.
You sign it, yeah.
I need to go
I
to-
can't give.
Anything else from utility committee?
No, not for me anyway.
Not from you anyways. Report of the tree warden. Tree warden Tony Field's not with us today. He did show up yesterday when the governance committee was meeting. Talked about his engagement with the various projects, not the governance committee, the safety committee.
Budget. You can hear the
Budget,
workshop.
very
You
good,
can hear
budget
the
workshop. We had several meetings at the budget workshop. And everything seems fine. Tony may be, has some personal stuff going on. He may be in and out over the near future, but very excited about the various projects that are happening and working closely with the tree committee. And now we have, as I said, we've indicated here, we've been through a lot for 2.5 hours. Are there any members of the public who would like to comment on any of the agenda items that have been discussed here today?
My
Please.
comment is, you are all heroes, and on the 4th of July, you should be carried around on Savannah.
Oh, thank you.
I agree.
We gotta have this comment thinking more often.
I was looking for something more critical, but I'll take that. Anything else from the public? We'll move now to new and continuing business, and we can pick several items there. Our next meeting, I'll just note, is Sunday, July 15th, again at 8 a.m. We're going to have the August meeting over at Drinkwater School, and obviously there'll be information on that in advance. Make sure that Dan gets the word out about that particularly. I'm going to knock off, well, we have 3 items here really. Ruggles Parking, Beal Park Fence Renewal, and Memorial Committee. 2 of those, I believe, Dick, are yours. So
we did the fence.
we did talk about fence, at least it's in the budget, I believe, right? So that's done.
Well, it was
It's
an approved project.
approved to be spent this year.
It's approved to be spent this year. Just so, could you just quickly talk for the public, Dick, about what Beal Park Fence Renewal refers to?
Well, the lower end of Clinton Street, which is now one way up the hill, used to have quite a nice decorative fence across the lower end, up until Bill's brother took it out with a snowplow. And it was never really a good safety barrier, but it was decorative and it was attractive, and the people in the neighborhood planted window boxes on it. It has now become pretty much
Demolition.
demolition, yeah. And so the idea is to, and the village has funded up to $1,000 for materials and other things to upgrade that fence back to how it was. It is not going to be a safety barrier. It is going to be a decorative fence.
Thank you. Ruggles Park parking.
Mike, I think you brought that up. I didn't.
Ruggles, there's been an issue raised about parking at the bottom, an option for parking at the bottom of Ruggles Park. Is that something you want to discuss now?
You mean relative to the seawall?
Relative to the seawall, is that, it had been raised?
Yeah, one of the interesting things that came out of the design so far is that Regina Leonard, who you know next week if you come to the meeting, has done a lot of research into sort of the historical nature of the park, and she's very interested in obviously preserving the park the way it is. And one of the findings she came up with is that one of the real sort of characteristics of our park is that we've always had informal parking. Is that we've never had sort of parking lot or parking spaces or anything. You go back to horse and buggies, and it was like that. And they would pull the horse and buggies off the side, right on a main street like we do today. You know, so she said any way to sort of improve parking, in other words, if we took away that parking, any way to improve it would be to formalize it. So, and she doesn't think that that's a good idea. So, you know, we are looking at some of the alternatives next weekend that do have an impact on parking, and we need to figure out what we want to do with that. So, if anybody has any opinions on parking, I'd definitely like to hear them either now or
Offline later after.
offline afterwards, and we can talk about that. Okay.
Thank you. Memorial Committee.
We'll talk about it at the next meeting.
At the next
But
meeting.
Vicki and I are ready to.
Excellent.
I would bring to people's attention, there is a white plastic vinyl bench down in Bayview Park, which is quite attractive and certainly looks more durable than the memorial benches that were, thank you, Gina. The story I heard was that the neighbors to the Freemans backed out of their driveway and backed into a bench that was there and had to replace it, and they replaced it with much higher quality than was originally there. Looks like a high quality bench. I would consider thinking about getting rid of or not continuing adding those concrete / 2x4 benches that we've been using. That's too much.
Yeah, I can.
But take a look at the bench, the white bench off to the right on Bayview Park.
It's privately owned.
It is right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we'll look at that.
Wonderful. Judy, you had any other new
Well,
business?
if Memorial Committee, and I know that we're running out late on time here, if the Memorial Committee was in the context of the benches, Billy just whispered to me, what are we doing about repairing the benches that we had authorized repairing in April? I wasn't here in May, so I don't know what conversation he was just talking to me about.
Remember, I presented you guys with a thing for somebody that said they would fix them for $45 an hour, the boards and the things that are bad that need to be fixed on all. And we held that back and because of the explanation that they were saying it might take 2 hours to do one screw. And I had a different idea when I heard that. So we didn't pursue it any farther, but with everything going on, I just got thinking, you know, we really haven't decided to fix that yet.
I think we wait till we hear from.
No, I think we have to, so the recommendation is that we fix the benches.
Okay.
I mean, I think
Do we have to,
Is there a budget for it?
we just spend the money?
Yeah.
I don't believe it.
That's it.
It was, as I recall, an extremely open-ended offer at $45 an hour with no idea of how many hours might be involved.
Right. I've since then talked to Rob Sherman to work on him slowly. He'll do a much better thing and he'll be honest on the hours. I wasn't sure that the firm that wanted to do it would be firm on the hours.
I love the Rob Sherman option if he's willing to do it.
Should we authorize a certain number of hours right now?
We don't really know what it's gonna take. 'Cause some of them you can't tighten the screws up, you're gonna break it. So you gotta re-anchor them. Drill that all out, re-anchor it. So it's kind of it's a hard one to know exactly what's gonna cost.
So was the recommendation now to work with Rob Sherman to see if he can fix them?
I would like that. I feel comfortable with that.
Maybe at an amount to not exceed
Well, you're authorized to spend up to $500.
$500.
Let's at least start with that.
Yeah.
And then in July, we could see where we are.
Yeah.
Because I think the question is if they're too expensive to fix, then maybe we have to take them out.
Exactly.
Right, exactly.
Well, we might be able to prioritize too, and do so many this year, and maybe so many next year.
Yeah. Okay.
Speed that up.
All right,
Well, I
so
just
it's
wanted to get
within
an idea
your
of
authority,
who-
the $500 authority.
Who we wanted to do it.
Yeah, Rob.
Anything else in terms of business?
Just the dedication
Shall we?
of the annual report.
You change your tune?
Well, I was encouraging these people to all leave.
Oh, no, I thought you were saying something public, but just, yes, I didn't go into executive session
No,
here. Very brief.
we want to go look at the team clock. We can't be in executive session, but I don't know.
Whoa, so what's the second, please?
We did approve
Yeah, anytime.
Just the.
did the overseers also vote to include a warrant to replace those phones? I don't think we did.
Right at the entry.